There's something strange about the abandoned places in Texas. If you've ever stepped inside one, you know what I mean. Silent houses sitting miles from the nearest road, wind howling through broken windows, and that heavy feeling that something is still living there, watching. This video is called 20 Unexplained Encounters on Abandoned Texas Properties. These are real accounts from people who've wandered too far into forgotten land, places where time stopped, and something else started moving in the dark. From voices echoing through empty farmhouses to lights glowing over dead ranches, every story here is a reminder that some things in Texas refuse to stay buried. You're watching Creepy Vibes, where every story is based on real events and every detail pulls you deeper into the shadows of reality. Before we start, here's something wild. Nearly 90% of you watching right now haven't subscribed. I'm trying to reach 6,000 subscribers this month, and you can help make that happen. If you love true horror stories and want more every night, hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and get comfortable. Also, drop a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now I say let's step onto those abandoned Texas properties and see what never left. The desert had a way of swallowing sound. Out near Marfa, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air itself was listening. That's what struck them first. The 5 students from the University of Texas who'd driven out in a rented van to shoot their senior film. They called it a documentary on American folklore and the persistence of myth. But really it was just an excuse to chase the Marfa lights, those strange orbs that danced across the desert horizon. Nobody had ever proven what they were. Some said they were ghosts, others said swamp gas, though there wasn't a swamp within 200 miles. The locals had stopped trying to explain it. They just said the lights came and went, and you were lucky if all you saw were the lights. It was late October, the desert wind sharp enough to sting, and they'd found an abandoned ranch off a service road to set up their base. The house had no roof in parts, the walls pocked with bullet holes, a blackened fireplace that smelled faintly of burnt animal fat. The property had belonged to a man named Earl Ridley, who disappeared back in the 70s. No one ever found his body, only a radio still playing static on a nightstand. That detail had shown up in one of the local stories, and it was exactly the kind of thing that intrigued Miles, the group's director. He was the sort who believed every town hid a secret, and every secret deserved a lens pointed at it. They arrived at sunset. The sky bruised itself into purple, and the desert floor shimmered with heat that wasn't really there. Jenna, the sound engineer, started setting up her field recorder near the window. She said she wanted to capture the ambiance. When Miles teased her, she shrugged. "Listen to that," she said. You can almost hear the silence humming. The first night passed uneventfully. They drank cheap beer, played cards, and joked about what they'd do if they saw the lights. Tom, the cinematographer, kept glancing out the window anyway. Around midnight, something flickered at the edge of the horizon, 3 pale dots moving in perfect synchronization. They rose, paused, and blinked out. When they came back, they'd shifted, closer this time. Everyone grabbed their cameras, tripping over cables, laughing nervously. The footage looked good on playback, eerie and grainy, the lights pulsing in rhythm. Jenna's recorder, though, picked up something else. A low hiss beneath the wind, like a voice buried in the static. They joked about it until the laughter felt forced. Jenna turned the gain down, then up again, trying to isolate the sound. "It's like..." She stopped. The whisper came again, faint but clear enough to make her pale. It said her name, just once, drawn out like breath through teeth. They listened again, and there it was. "Jenna." Then silence deep enough to make her flinch. Miles grinned, too eager. "Perfect," he said. "It's exactly what we need." The second day was hotter. The wind blew dust through the cracks in the walls, and the smell of rot lingered around the back porch, where the ground sagged in a strange depression. Tom refused to go near it. He said the dirt there looked wrong, too loose, like it had been dug up recently. Miles told him to get over it. They set up more cameras, ran interviews, and by evening the air felt charged again. The lights appeared later that night, brighter, closer, almost hovering over the ridge. Jenna's equipment began to hiss even before she hit record. This time the static wasn't random. It pulsed in bursts like a heartbeat. Then came words, fragmented, overlapping. "Go. Back. Stop." Her name again, but this time followed by laughter, distant and mechanical. They didn't sleep much. The power pack drained faster than usual. The temperature inside the house dropped 10 degrees and their footage began to glitch. Faces distorted on playback. A figure showed up behind Miles in one of the shots just for a frame. A silhouette near the window, motionless. They assumed it was lens flare until they checked another angle. The same figure stood in the same spot, but the camera that caught it was facing the opposite direction. By dawn, Jenna wanted to leave. She said she couldn't take the noise anymore. The static hadn't stopped since the night before. It filled her headphones, her dreams, her skull. Even when she unplugged the recorder, she could still hear it faintly, like something vibrating under her skin. Tom agreed, said the ranch gave him headaches, said he felt like he was being watched. But Miles was stubborn. "One more night," he said. "We're on to something." That final night, the lights didn't appear. The desert was dark, too dark. No stars, no wind. The silence pressed in, suffocating. Around 2 in the morning, the radio they'd found in the corner crackled to life on its own. It wasn't plugged in. The static rolled through the room, louder than before, layered with whispers. Miles grabbed his camera, filming everything. The radio's dial turned slowly, back and forth, as if someone invisible was tuning it. A man's voice came through, warped and broken. "He's still here," it said. "Underneath." Then the broadcast cut to a shriek so sharp it made their ears bleed. Tom ran outside yelling, desperate for fresh air. Jenna followed but stopped dead on the porch. The lights were back, not hovering this time but drifting low to the ground, moving toward them in slow, deliberate patterns. The dirt by the depression began to shift, as if something was crawling up from beneath. Miles shouted for them to keep filming, but the cameras went dark one by one, batteries dead. The static grew louder, almost deafening now, the air vibrating with it. Jenna screamed that she could hear her own voice in it, repeating over and over, "Help me, help me, help me." The next morning, a local rancher found the van abandoned by the road, engine running, doors open. No sign of the students, just their equipment scattered across the yard. The footage recovered from the cameras was useless, corrupted, blurred beyond recognition. Only the audio survived. Hours of static, and beneath it, 5 distinct voices whispering each other's names. Months later, back in Austin, a sound technician hired to clean up the recording went missing after working late in the editing lab. Security footage showed him staring at the waveform on his monitor, frozen. The screen displayed a line of static that suddenly flattened into silence. Then faintly, the speakers whispered his name. Now, the locals near Marfa say the lights still appear, but if you listen closely, especially on nights without wind, you can hear a low hum in the distance, like a radio caught between stations murmuring through the desert. They say if you stand still long enough, it starts saying your name too. When the summer drought hit Red River County in 1962, the soil cracked so wide that you could lose a nickel in it. The fields browned, the cattle went thin, and the old families that had held onto their land since before the Depression began to fold. Among them was the Dunbar family, who lived off Highway 71, a mile past the abandoned grain elevator. Their farm had once been a proud sprawl of white fences and sorghum rows, but by August it was a ghost. The barn sagged inward. The windows of the farmhouse were boarded up and a dry, stinking wind blew across the fields. Only one thing remained untouched behind the property line: the stone well, built in 1901 and capped with a rusted iron grate. Locals said the well was bad ground. Even when the Dunbars were alive, no one drank from it. The water was supposed to come up black sometimes like ink, and the bucket would smell faintly of sulfur. When the last of the Dunbars died, a little boy named Frank who fell from the hayloft and broke his neck, the farm went silent. Folks said the well started whispering after dark. It sat that way for nearly 50 years, lost behind creeping cedar and wiregrass until the spring of 2011, when a man named Raymond Holt bought the property at auction. Holt wasn't from around there. He was a Houston contractor looking for cheap land where he could build a cabin, maybe a fishing pond. He had a girlfriend who called him Ray, a big red truck and no sense of history. He didn't know about the whispers or the boy, or the nights when the well filled itself with black rain. The first time Ray saw the well was on a cloudy April afternoon. He'd been clearing brush with a rented backhoe when his tire struck something hard. He climbed down, kicked through the weeds, and found the stone lip half buried in the dirt. It was old rough-hewn limestone stacked in a circle, capped with a heavy grate. The iron was pitted, but the hinge still turned when he nudged it open. He peered down into the darkness and saw nothing but his own reflection in a thin pool of water. It was so still that it looked like glass. He dropped a pebble. The splash echoed deep and then went silent. That night, the rain came. Not a hard storm, just a slow, soaking drizzle that turned the soil to slick clay. When Ray came back the next morning, he noticed something odd. The water in the well had risen. It wasn't unusual after rain, but what caught his eye was what floated on the surface. A small wooden horse, the kind kids used to pull on a string. Its paint was faded to pale blue, its wheels rusted. He fished it out with a stick, wiped it clean, and tossed it into the back of his truck. Probably left over from the Dunbar family, he thought. Maybe some old toy dropped in decades ago and finally worked its way up. That night, another appeared. He saw it just before dawn. A rubber ball, bright red, bobbing in the well water like a heart. He hadn't seen a ball like that since his own childhood, the kind made before everything turned to plastic. He picked it up. The rubber was cracked, soaked, and it smelled of earth and mildew. He placed it on the porch, thinking maybe the rain had washed junk out of the ground somehow. But the third night brought something that changed his mind. He woke to a faint sound like metal scraping stone. It came from outside, rhythmic and wet. He went out barefoot, flashlight in hand. The beam caught the trees, the rusted tractor, and finally the well. The grate was open. The water had risen again, and floating at the top were a dozen objects: tin soldiers, a doll with one eye missing, a yo-yo, a set of jacks. All of them glistened with moisture as if they'd just been pulled from a pond. He knelt, watching the slow movement of the toys, the way they turned toward him one by one, as if nudged by a hidden current. The air smelled like rotting leaves. He felt something brush against his wrist, cold and slimy, and jerked back. The water rippled once, then went still. He closed the grate, padlocked it, and went back inside, but sleep didn't come. The toys stayed in his mind, bobbing silently in the dark. By the next morning, the lock was broken. The grate hung open. The toys were gone. In their place, only a single item remained: a small metal badge, bent and rusted. When he cleaned it off, he could just make out the engraving. Frank Dunbar, Hallsville Elementary, 1958. He dropped it. That evening, he drove into town, stopped at the diner, and asked around about the Dunbars. The waitress, a woman in her 70s with a smoker's voice, told him what she knew. Frank was 9, she said. Fell from the loft one summer. Broke his neck. They say his mama went mad after that. Every morning she'd sit by that well and sing to him. Said she could hear him down there. When she died, they buried her beside it. Ray laughed it off at the time. Old country stories, he thought. Every place had them. But that night he couldn't stop thinking about the sound of the grate moving, or the toys rising up like offerings. The next few nights the pattern continued. Every morning something new appeared: a toy train, a child's shoe, a lunchbox with faded cowboy decals. All from the 1950s, all soaked. He began to keep them in a box on the porch, unsure what else to do. He even set up a motion sensor camera aimed at the well. The camera caught nothing. At exactly 2:14 a.m. every night, the feed went black for 10 seconds. When it came back, the water level was higher, and a new object was there. On the 7th night, the toys stopped. Instead, he heard a splash. He crept out again, the beam of his flashlight trembling. The grate was open, the chain broken again. He looked down and saw not water, but something like mud, thick, black, bubbling slowly, and rising from that muck a shape. Small hands, pale and glistening, grasped the stones of the well. A child's face followed, bloated, gray, and covered in slime. Its eyes were open but clouded, its mouth moving silently as mud dripped from its chin. Ray froze. He wanted to run but couldn't. The thing climbed halfway out, a wet shoe dangling from its foot, and held out its hand. In it was the metal badge he had dropped. "Play," it said. The voice was thin, gurgling, filled with water. Ray staggered back, tripped over the porch step, and fell hard. When he looked up again, the well was empty. Only ripples disturbed the surface. By morning, the toys were gone again, but the ground around the well was wet, though there'd been no rain. His camera was smashed. He packed his bags that day, ready to leave the farm for good. But before he did, he decided to cover the well completely. He drove into town, bought bags of quick-set concrete, and poured it in until the opening was sealed smooth. He stood watching it harden under the sun, relieved. That night, the rain returned. It poured harder than he'd seen all year, hammering the roof until it shook. Sometime after midnight, a noise woke him. The same scraping sound, louder this time. He looked outside and saw water streaming down the hill from behind the barn. The concrete had cracked. By dawn, the well had burst open. Water, thick and brown, spilled across the yard, carrying with it the toys, hundreds of them now, spinning and tumbling like debris in a flood. They clogged the porch steps, rolled against his truck tires. Dolls, trucks, marbles, metal cars, jump ropes, all drifting in from the overflowing pit. Ray tried to drive away, but the truck's tires sank into the mud. He ran instead, splashing through the water toward the road. Behind him, the sound grew louder, the slap of small feet, dozens of them. When the sheriff found the place 2 days later, the farmhouse was empty. The truck was still in the yard, engine flooded, doors open. The well had filled itself again, perfectly calm. No sign of the toys, no sign of Ray. But sometimes after dark, the townsfolk say they hear the sound of children laughing near the fence line, and if you walk close enough, you can see something floating in the water. Not a reflection, not toys either. Just the shapes of small pale hands reaching upward, waiting for someone to play. The night had settled over Clearwater County like an old, heavy quilt, thick with the smell of oil, wet asphalt, and mesquite. Sheriff Walter Briggs sat in his cruiser outside the diner that hadn't served a soul past midnight in 20 years. His radio crackled faintly, the soft hum of static filling the cabin. It was a quiet night, too quiet even for a town that had been dying since the oil dried up in the 80s. Only the flickering light above the diner's door kept him company, swaying in the wind that carried the sound of rusted signs and creaking metal roofs from the abandoned rigs north of town. He was thinking about turning in when the dispatch came through. A woman's voice, thin, trembling like she was whispering through static. "Sheriff, there's someone at the old Dunn property." Briggs blinked and sat up straighter. The Dunn property had been condemned for decades. Folks used to call it the Hollow House, a 2-story ranch where Thomas Dunn and his family disappeared without a trace in 1983. Every few years, kids would sneak in and swear they heard voices. But tonight, the tone in that call felt different. The voice on the line sounded scared. He keyed his radio. "Ma'am, identify yourself." "You said the Dunn property?" Static. Then a faint, wet sob. "He's in the walls." The line went dead. Briggs rubbed the back of his neck, uneasy. He called dispatch, but his deputy, a kid named Avery, said they hadn't logged any incoming calls. No record, no trace. Just dead air. Briggs didn't like that. He'd been sheriff in Clearwater for 27 years, and the only thing that ever truly spooked him was the unknown. He turned the key and the cruiser's engine coughed to life. The headlights cut across the black highway like twin blades. The Dunn property sat 7 miles out past the edge of town, beyond the fields and rusting pumps that still rose like crosses from the earth. He drove slow, one hand on the wheel, one on the thermos that had gone lukewarm hours ago. The farther he went, the more he felt the weight of the dark pressing in. No lights from farmhouses, no hum of trucks, just emptiness and the distant wail of coyotes. When the house finally appeared through the trees, he almost missed it. The structure leaned like a tired old man, its roof caved in on one side, its windows gaping black. The yard was choked with weeds and an old windmill creaked somewhere in the dark. Briggs parked by the rusted gate and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The beam caught on broken glass and the faint shimmer of old police tape that fluttered weakly in the wind. He radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Briggs. I'm at the Dunn property. Got a report of possible trespassing. We'll update shortly." A pause. Then Avery's voice. "Copy that, Sheriff. Be careful out there. Nobody's been near that place in years." Briggs clicked the radio off and approached the porch. Each step groaned under his boots. The air smelled of rot and old dust. He pushed the door open and it gave with a sigh like something inside had been waiting. The beam of his flashlight swept across the foyer, a staircase leading up into darkness. Wallpaper peeling in long strips, furniture draped in cobwebs. The silence was deep, oppressive. He called out, "This is Sheriff Briggs. If anyone's here, step out where I can see you." Nothing. He moved through the house slow, checking corners, scanning for squatters or teenagers. His boots left faint prints in the dust, the only new marks in decades. When he reached the kitchen, he noticed the rotary phone on the counter. Its receiver hung by the cord, swaying slightly. That's when the sound came. A faint dragging somewhere upstairs. He froze, listening. It came again, slow, deliberate. He called out, "Hello?" Who's up there? No answer. He climbed the stairs, each step complaining under his weight. The flashlight's beam caught on family portraits lining the wall. Faces faded, eyes blackened with mold. At the top, the hallway stretched long and narrow, the doors open like mouths. The sound had stopped. He checked the first room. Empty. The second, nothing but a broken crib and old newspapers from 1983. Then he reached the master bedroom. The door was half closed. Something dark glistened on the wood. Moisture, maybe. He nudged it open with his boot. Inside, the air was colder. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. The bed frame had collapsed, the ceiling sagged, and on the far wall he saw something that didn't fit. The wallpaper was torn in long, deep strips, revealing the studs beneath. Between them, something pale was wedged, like fabric or flesh. He stepped closer. The beam caught a human hand pressed between the boards, fingers stiff and gray. He staggered back, breath catching in his throat. He'd seen corpses before, accidents, suicides, worse. But this was different. The hand looked fresh. He raised the radio. "Dispatch, I've got a body. Repeat, possible body at the Dunn place. Need backup in coroner." Static. Then faintly, Avery's voice. "Sheriff, you're breaking up." "Where exactly are you?" Before he could respond, the wall shifted. The boards creaked outward and a wet, hollow sound came from within, like something breathing through rotten wood. He swung the flashlight back just in time to see the hand twitch. Then another one appeared beside it, smaller, fingers clawing weakly against the plaster. A child's hand. The wall pulsed, the boards straining, and from behind them came the faintest whisper. "Sheriff?" He stumbled back, nearly tripping over debris. The whisper grew louder. Overlapping voices, desperate and pleading. "Help us, he won't let us out." The flashlight flickered. He turned to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch, the air thickening around him. The house groaned, timbers popping, and down the stairs came the sound of heavy footsteps. Slow, wet, deliberate. He raised his revolver, heart pounding. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the creak of the lower steps as something began to climb. He fired once into the dark. The report echoed through the house, deafening, but when the smoke cleared, there was nothing. Only silence. Then the radio on his shoulder crackled. Avery's voice, distant. "Sheriff, what's your status?" "We lost your signal. You okay?" Briggs lifted the mic, his hand trembling. "Avery, there's something in the walls." Static swallowed the rest. The dispatch log recorded his last words at 2:47 a.m. When Avery arrived 15 minutes later, the cruiser was still parked by the gate, engine idling, headlights cutting across the field. The front door of the house hung open. He called out for the sheriff, but heard only the wind and the faint creak of that windmill turning. He stepped inside. The dust was undisturbed except for Briggs's footprints, leading upstairs and stopping in front of the master bedroom. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of a body, just the faint smell of ozone and old wood. The radio lay on the floor, the casing cracked. Later that morning, when Avery reviewed the dispatch tapes, he found something that shouldn't have been possible. At 3:02 a.m., 15 minutes after Briggs's final transmission, the radio picked up again. Same frequency, same ID. The sheriff's voice. "Avery?" The voice trembled, distorted by static. "I found them. They're still here. They want me to stay." A pause. Then a low, distant noise. Not quite a scream, not quite a laugh, and rose behind him before the line cut dead. The recording ends there. The Dunn property was condemned again the following week, sealed off by the county. No one's gone near it since, but on clear nights, if you drive down County Road 7 and tune to the old sheriff's frequency, sometimes you'll hear a faint voice calling through the static, asking for backup that never comes. The land stretched for miles beneath a low, bruised sky, a quilt of yellowed grass and cracked soil stitched together by barbed wire and dust. The man who bought it, Dale Wren, was 53 years old, hard-faced and heavy-handed from years of ranch work in the Panhandle. He'd spent everything he had on this patch of earth just outside a dying Texas town called Cutterswell, figuring he could build it back up, maybe run a few hundred head of cattle again. The real estate agent had seemed too eager to sell. "Cheap," he'd said, smiling too wide. "Plenty of space. Fertile soil." But Dale had noticed the way the man wouldn't quite look toward the northern fields, the way his thumb had worried at his wedding ring while Dale signed the papers. The first thing he noticed when he drove the fence line that evening was the smell, or rather the lack of one. There were bones out there, dozens, maybe hundreds, a whole herd's worth of cattle skeletons scattered like forgotten toys. Sun-bleached skulls, ribs arched toward the fading sky, hooves still intact, some half sunk into the dirt. They should have stunk to high heaven or at least drawn scavengers, but the air was empty, still and clean. The skeletons looked old but not weathered, their ivory surfaces strangely smooth and untouched. And every time Dale's truck rumbled by, he swore the sockets in those skulls turned toward him, like invisible cords were tugging them to watch. That night he tried not to think about it. He drank beer on the porch, listening to the distant hum of power lines and the hollow whistle of wind across the plains. The house was small, 2 bedrooms and a kitchen with peeling wallpaper that smelled faintly of ammonia. The previous owners had left a few things behind: a chipped crucifix nailed to the bedroom doorframe, a rusted horseshoe above the back window, and an old Polaroid tucked into a drawer showing a family smiling in front of the barn. They all looked tired, their smiles forced. The date scrawled on the bottom corner read July 1983. Dale set it aside and told himself he didn't believe in curses, just hard luck and bad soil. The next morning, he started work early. He planned to tear down the sagging barn, rebuild the corral, and set up new fencing before bringing in any livestock. But by mid-morning, the air had changed. The wind died completely, and the heat settled in heavy and unnatural, like the air itself was pressing down on him. The land felt wrong under his boots, hollow somehow. He walked toward the northern field again, unable to shake the thought of those bones. When he reached them, he knelt beside a skull. The thing was flawless, no cracks, no insect marks, not even dust in the sockets. He poked it with a stick, expecting it to crumble like chalk, but it held firm. As he stood, he noticed the faintest movement, like the jaw shifting as if it had tried to breathe. He froze. Nothing. Just a trick of the heat, he told himself. But as he turned back toward the truck, he felt eyes on him, cold and steady, even though nothing moved in that dead field. By late afternoon, the horizon burned red, and the barn groaned in the wind like it was remembering something. Inside, the air was thick with rot and mildew. Old tools hung from nails, rusted solid. Something dripped from the rafters, a slow, rhythmic tap on the dirt floor. He thought it was water until he saw the stain beneath it, dark and sticky. When he held his flashlight up, he saw what looked like a long strip of hide clinging to a beam. Hair still on it, fresh, wet. But there hadn't been any animals on the property for decades. That night the dream started. Dale saw the cattle standing in the moonlight, skinless but alive, ribs flexing like bellows, their eyes bright and full of a dull, steady intelligence. They moved in slow unison, their hooves not touching the ground. When he woke, he thought he heard them outside the window. The soft creak of bone, the clatter of something shifting weightlessly in the grass. He stayed still, holding his breath. Then just as suddenly, silence. He told himself it was wind. It was always wind. A few days later, a man from town came by, a feed store owner named Whit. He'd lived in Cutter's Well all his life and carried the weariness of someone who'd seen too much of it. "You bought the old Latham place," he said, eyes flicking toward the distant field. "Ain't been right since that winter of '83. Dale offered him a beer and asked what he meant. Whit hesitated, glancing toward the barn. Latham ran cattle up there, good herd. Then one spring he woke to find every last one dead. They say he tried to burn them, but they wouldn't catch. Wouldn't rot neither. Sheriff said maybe poison in the soil, maybe radiation, who knows. But Latham left one night and didn't take a damn thing with him." Whit finished his beer, looking pale. "If you're smart, you'll leave it be." But Dale didn't leave. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. He'd lost everything in the last drought, and he wasn't about to run because some old-timer spun ghost stories. He dug a pit out back and decided to bury one of the skulls, just to prove to himself that it was ordinary bone. He took his shovel to the field and chose a smaller carcass near the fence line. As he pried the skull loose, he noticed the ground beneath it was damp, though it hadn't rained in weeks. When he touched it, the moisture smeared dark across his palm like blood. He stepped back, heart pounding, but forced himself to keep going. He dropped the skull into the hole and covered it up. When he turned to leave, something caught his eye. The other skeletons, all of them facing him now. Every last hollow socket fixed on his back. That night he couldn't sleep. The air inside the house felt charged, thick with electricity. The light bulbs flickered even though the power lines outside were steady. Around midnight he heard the faint sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, circling the house. He grabbed his rifle and went to the window. The moonlight lit the yard in silver, and there, just beyond the fence, stood the silhouettes of cattle. Dozens of them, motionless. He blinked and they were gone, but the sound remained, the gentle clatter of bone on bone, the faint moan of something that remembered being alive. When dawn came, he went outside to find the field churned up like a storm had hit it. Dirt was piled in small mounds, and where he'd buried the skull, the earth was split open. The hole was empty. A set of hoofprints led away toward the barn, pressed deep into the soil. He followed them, rifle in hand, the morning light painting everything in pale gold. Inside, the smell hit him first, coppery and sweet. Hanging from the rafters was the same skull, still slick, with strands of something dark trailing from its jaw. Beneath it, the ground rippled as though something beneath the dirt was moving, breathing. Dale stumbled back, tripping over a broken beam. The sound of hooves echoed again, louder now from every direction. The barn door slammed shut on its own, plunging him into darkness. He could hear them, snorting, rattling, a low, guttural noise that rose like a chant. The air stank of sulfur and iron. Then the floor gave way beneath him. When he came to, it was dusk again. He was lying in the northern field, his hands buried in the dirt, mouth full of dust. Around him stood the cattle. Not bones now, but whole, alive. Their flesh slick and red, steaming in the cold air. They stared at him with eyes that glowed faintly yellow. One stepped closer, and Dale realized it wasn't breathing. None of them were. Their chest didn't rise or fall. Their skin pulsed like it was trying to remember the shape of life. He ran. The truck wouldn't start, so he went on foot, stumbling across the uneven ground until the house loomed ahead. The porch light flickered on as he reached it, though he hadn't left it on. Inside, the Polaroid lay on the table. The faces in it had changed. The family was gone, replaced by shapes that looked almost human. Eyes hollow, skin pulled tight over bone. And behind them, in the photo's background, Dale saw the barn. Its doors open, something glowing faintly inside. By the time the sheriff came 2 weeks later, the house was empty. The truck still sat in the drive, keys in the ignition. The barn had collapsed, and in the northern field, the bones were gone. All that remained was a single skull, half buried, its sockets facing the house. And when the wind picked up that evening, it carried with it a faint hollow sound like hooves striking dry earth, circling and circling in the dark. Highway 287 cuts through the flat belly of Texas like a scar that refuses to heal. Endless stretches of asphalt framed by mesquite and scrub brush, with towns so small their names barely make it onto the map. Truckers know the road by its rhythm. The kike, steady hum of tires over faded white lines. The flicker of distant gas stations and the kind of silence that presses against the glass when you stop the engine. Somewhere between Wichita Falls and Amarillo, there's a stretch where the land opens wide and dark, and if you drive it after midnight, you might see a soft green glow on the horizon. That's where Motel 19 is said to appear. No one agrees on exactly where. Some say near the old cattle pen south of Vernon. Others swear it's closer to Electra. The stories are all the same, though. The motel shows up out of nowhere, every few months, always on nights when the moon is thin and the wind is low. It sits back from the road, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. People stop, check in, and vanish. No one ever finds the place after dawn. There was a man named Paul Henley who drove that road 3 nights a week hauling parts for a farm equipment supplier out of Fort Worth. Divorced, quiet, not much of a talker. He liked the night runs because they kept him away from people. He'd heard the motel stories from other drivers at a diner near Bowie. They talked about it like a campfire legend, laughing, teasing each other about green ghosts and haunted highways. Paul had nodded along, pretending not to care, but something about the details stuck with him. The green light, the vanishing guests, the way the motel wasn't there when the sun came up. He didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but he'd seen enough strange things on the road to know that sometimes the world folds in ways you can't explain. It was late October when Paul first saw the glow. He was heading northwest, the cab warm, the radio low. Around 1 a.m, the horizon shimmered faintly green, like someone had lit a flare in the distance. He thought it was a reflection, off his windshield until he crested a small rise and saw it clearly. A row of dim lights, a parking lot, a sign swaying slightly in the wind. Motel 19. The letters buzzed weakly, the 9 flickering in and out. The building looked old, maybe 1950s, with peeling paint and a flat roof. A single car sat in the lot, an old Ford with rust crawling up the sides. He slowed, then turned in, gravel crunching under his tires. The office was small, its window glowing green from the sign outside. Inside sat a woman, middle-aged, her hair the color of cigarette ash, wearing a pink sweater that had seen better years. She looked up and smiled, though her eyes didn't move with the expression. "Need a room?" she asked. Paul hesitated. Something about the air felt wrong. It was too still, too heavy. The hum of the neon outside was louder than it should have been. He nodded anyway. "Yeah, just for a few hours, been driving all night." She slid a key across the counter, the metal tag stamped with the number 6. "Cash only," she said. He paid. She didn't count the bills, just tucked them into a drawer. "Breakfast at 6, she added, though he didn't see any dining area. The hallway smelled like old carpet and rain that had never quite dried. Room 6 was halfway down, the door sticking slightly before it gave. Inside was simple: a bed, a small table, a lamp, and a television that looked older than he was. The air was stale, thick with the faint odor of mildew. Paul set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets were cold. He flipped on the TV and static filled the screen. No channels, just the low hiss of white noise. He left it on, the sound oddly comforting. He must have dozed off because when he opened his eyes, the static had stopped. The room was dark except for the faint green light leaking through the curtains. The clock on the nightstand blinked 3:03. The hum from the neon outside was louder now, vibrating through the walls. He sat up. There was a sound, something dragging across the pavement outside. Slow, deliberate, like a shovel or a foot. He stood, crossed to the window, and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. The parking lot was empty. The old Ford was gone. The office lights were off, but across the lot near one of the other rooms a door stood open. A pale shape moved inside, just out of view. It was small, hunched, and its skin, or what looked like skin, seemed to glow faintly, the same color as the sign. Paul froze, every instinct telling him to shut the curtain and leave, but he couldn't move. The shape turned, and for a second, he saw its face. Not human. The eyes were hollow, the mouth wide, stretching too far across its face. It looked like a person who had been hollowed out and lit from the inside. He stumbled back, knocking into the table. The lamp flickered and went out. The hum grew louder, turning into a deep, throbbing vibration that rattled his teeth. Then came the knocking. 3 hard raps on the door. He didn't answer. The knob turned slowly, then stopped. Silence. He waited, heart pounding. When he finally dared to look again, the green light outside had dimmed. The knocking didn't return, but something scratched at the window glass, light and patient, like fingernails tracing letters he couldn't see. At dawn, the room was empty. A state trooper found Paul's truck abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 287, engine still running, driver's side door open. No sign of a struggle, no tracks leading away. His wallet and phone were on the seat. The motel wasn't there, just a patch of dirt and sagebrush. They searched for days, brought in dogs, helicopters, the works. Nothing. But the strangest thing came a week later, when a farmer near Harold found a key in his field after a storm. A tarnished metal tag stamped with the number 6. He turned it in to the sheriff, who put it in a drawer. The next morning it was gone. People still talk about Motel 19. A few have even claimed to see it since. Truckers, drifters, a college kid heading home for Thanksgiving. Always the same story. A green glow in the night. A woman at the desk. Rooms that hum with electricity. They say if you check in, you never check out. Some locals think the motel's a leftover piece of something that shouldn't exist anymore. A place caught between times, feeding on whoever's unlucky enough to stop. Others whisper it's a kind of punishment, a trap for people who carry too much guilt, too many sins. If you ever find yourself driving Highway 287 after midnight and see that faint green shimmer ahead, keep going. Don't slow down. Don't look at the sign. And whatever you do, don't stop for the night. It started started with a bet, the kind whispered between kids who didn't really believe in ghosts until they were standing in the dark, daring each other not to run. It was late October in the town of Barlow, Texas, the kind of small place that never made the news except for the occasional bar fight or brush fire. But Barlow had one claim to fame, one piece of history people didn't talk about after dark: the Barlow Elementary fire of 1979. 23 children and one teacher had died there when the old wiring sparked during a thunderstorm, trapping them inside. The building had stood empty ever since, blackened brick and warped metal rising from the edge of town like a scar no one could heal. For most folks, that would have been reason enough to stay away. But kids, especially bored high schoolers with too much time and cheap beer, are drawn to stories like that the way moths are drawn to flame. That's how Jason, Eli, and Marcy found themselves at the rusted chain-link fence one Friday night, flashlights trembling in their hands. Jason was the ringleader, the kind of boy who'd rather eat nails than back down from a dare. Eli was quieter, nervous, the one who'd read about the fire online and still agreed to come because he hated being left out. Marcy was Jason's girlfriend, pretty and sharp-tongued, pretending she wasn't scared, though she kept glancing toward the tree line like she expected something to move there. The gate had long been torn open, and they slipped through it easily, gravel crunching under their sneakers. The air smelled like rain and rot, and the wind whispered through the broken windows of the school like the soft, steady breathing of something asleep. "Let's make it quick," Marcy said, hugging herself. "We go in, look around, and get the hell out." 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Jason agreed with a grin. "But we have to go all the way in, to the classrooms." They stepped through what had once been the main entrance. The metal doors were melted and bent, the hallway beyond still streaked with soot. Their flashlights caught the faded shapes of lockers, some still hanging open, some fused shut. Someone had sprayed graffiti along the walls, names, curses, the usual junk. But underneath it all were faint shapes no one had painted, like children's drawings barely visible through the black. Houses, suns, smiling stick figures holding hands. Eli stopped. "You see that?" Jason brushed past him. "Old paint. Let's go." They moved deeper into the building. The hallway branched into classrooms. The floor creaked underfoot, warped from years of rain leaking through the roof. A rusted bell still hung over a doorway, the word Room 4A half burned off the plaque beside it. When they stepped inside, the air felt heavier, as if the room had never let go of the smoke that killed it. Desks were still lined up in rows, some melted, some only scorched. The blackboard at the front was covered in gray ash and what looked like faint chalk marks. Marcy's beam caught a message written there in a child's careful hand. "I did my homework. Can I go home now?" She swallowed hard. "Okay, that's not funny." "Probably someone messing around," Jason said, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. Eli moved toward one of the desks. The lid creaked when he lifted it. Inside was a stack of papers, browned around the edges but otherwise untouched. The top page had writing, pencil marks in childish loops and curves. Across the top, in smudged cursive, it said, "Name, Megan D. Date, May 17th, 1979. "That's impossible," Eli whispered. Jason snatched the paper. "You're kidding. It's just a prank." But the page was dry, crisp, not something planted yesterday. He flipped through the stack. Dozens of them. Math problems, spelling lists, little essays titled, "What I Want to Be When I Grow Up." Every single one was signed by names that matched the list of victims they'd read online. Marcy stepped back toward the door. "I don't like this." "We should go." Jason laughed, but it sounded forced. "Fine, you two wait outside. I'll check the next room. Probably just someone trying to freak people out." Eli followed despite himself. The next classroom looked the same. Burned desks, a layer of gray dust on everything. But the air was colder here. Their breath came out in white clouds. Jason kicked at a desk leg and frowned when it moved, scraping loud against the floor. Then he noticed the same thing. Papers inside, freshly written, signed by different names. Something shifted behind them. A sound like a chair sliding. Eli spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Nothing. Only the faint outline of small chairs and the warped teacher's desk at the front. Then came a sound like whispering, low and rhythmic, too quiet to make out words. "Marcy?" Jason called, no answer. They hurried back toward room 4A, but the doorway was darker than before, almost black, when like the light just stopped there. Jason stepped in and froze. The desks were no longer empty. Children sat there, rows of them, pale shapes hunched over papers, their hands moving slowly, deliberately, pencils scratching against paper. The air smelled of wet ash and something sweet like old fruit. Their faces were gray and soft, like clay that hadn't set. Their hair burnt at the ends. None of them looked up. Marcy stood near the front of the room, her flashlight trembling in her hand, eyes wide and unblinking. Jason grabbed her arm. "We're leaving, now." One of the children looked up. Her eyes were gone, just black holes sunk deep into her skull, but she smiled, a small, polite smile. "Did you bring your homework?" she asked in a voice that sounded like dry leaves. Jason pulled Marcy toward the hall, but the door slammed shut with a force that made the walls shake. The light flickered and went out. Eli screamed. Something grabbed Jason's sleeve, small fingers, cold and strong. He tore free, dragging Marcy behind him, ramming his shoulder into the door until it splintered open. They stumbled into the hall, coughing, half-blind. Smoke filled the corridor now, thick and gray. Through it came the sound of footsteps, many of them soft and measured like children lining up after recess. They ran, past the lockers, past the graffiti and the drawings that seemed brighter now, colors showing through, reds, yellows, blues, but all drawn in looping, uneven strokes, like melted crayons. Faces of children smiling under clouds of orange flame. When they burst outside, the night air felt like water, cool and clean. They didn't stop running until they reached the road. The school loomed behind them, perfectly still, windows dark. Eli collapsed to his knees, gasping. Jason turned to look back. For just a moment, he thought he saw light flickering in the upper windows, the steady glow of classroom lamps. Then he heard the faint sound of a bell ringing, the kind that called kids in from the playground. No one spoke on the drive back. Marcy sat silent in the back seat, staring out the window. When Jason dropped her off, she didn't say goodbye, just went inside without looking back. The next day, the sheriff's deputy found their car parked crooked outside Jason's house, engine off, doors locked from the inside. Jason was in the driver's seat, eyes open, a sheet of yellowed paper clutched in his hand. On it, written in neat pencil, were spelling words: smoke, flame, teacher, escape. At the top, in that same childish hand, name Jason L. Date, October 28, 2025. The Barlow School still stands at the edge of town, roof sagging, walls scorched. People say if you drive past late enough, you can see lights moving inside. And if you roll your window down, you might hear pencils scratching faintly in the dark. The children of Barlow never stopped doing their homework, and sometimes they like to help others finish theirs. The locals still talk about the windmill at Devil's Backbone. It stands on a ridge of limestone just south of Canyon Lake, a place where the Texas hill country folds into itself like the spine of something ancient. The road that winds past it, Farm to Market 32, snakes between mesquite and cedar, dipping low into valleys where fog clings to the brush like something alive. The windmill has been there longer than any of the houses, longer than the paved road, longer than anyone can remember. On most days it doesn't turn. The blades are rusted, warped from years of neglect. But sometimes when the air is perfectly still, the blades start to move. They turn against the wind, slow and deliberate, groaning with a sound that carries down into the valleys. And if you pull over and listen, if you're foolish enough to step out of your car and stand in that dry grass, you'll hear the blades whisper. I didn't believe that part until last summer. I'd taken a detour down through Wimberley after leaving Austin late in the afternoon, heading towards San Antonio. The sun was sinking, the sky bruised purple, and I didn't want to get on I-35 with all the commuters. So I took the back roads, Ranch Road 12, then 32 through the Backbone. I'd grown up around here, though I hadn't been back in years. When I passed the old windmill, I remembered my grandfather warning me about it when I was a kid. He used to say the ridge was cursed long before the windmill went up, that it marked where travelers disappeared before there were roads. The story was that the windmill wasn't built to pump water. It was built to mark a grave. The road was empty, no lights behind or ahead of me. The air had that heavy stillness before a storm, when even the cicadas go quiet. I saw the silhouette of the windmill against the dying light, tall, skeletal, with its blades tilted slightly like the head of a bird. Then I noticed something wrong. It was turning. There was no wind. The trees were still, the grass unmoving, yet the blades spun with a slow rhythm, Not fast like a machine, but steady like breathing. I felt a cold ripple crawl up my spine, the same instinct you get when you sense something watching you. I told myself it was just an old structure catching some stray current of air. But I slowed down anyway. Curiosity or something darker made me stop. The gravel shoulder crunched under my tires. I cut the engine. Silence fell over everything. Even the ticking of the cooling engine sounded too loud. I stepped out and leaned on the door, watching. The blades creaked as they turned. The sound wasn't metallic. It was softer, like a voice rasping through a closed door. I stepped closer, a few yards up the fence line. The air smelled like cedar and rust, but underneath that was something faintly sweet like decay. The closer I got, the more I thought I could hear words. Not clear ones, not anything human, but syllables shaped by the motion of the blades slicing through the air. Something in me wanted to listen harder. The sound seemed to come from inside my head, not through my ears. It wasn't English, but my mind started to shape it into meaning. Phrases flickered through my thoughts, half-formed. I heard my name. Then I heard the sound of a car accident, metal twisting, a scream, the crunch of glass. When I stepped back, the noise stopped. The blades froze mid-turn. I could feel my heartbeat thudding against my ribs. I got in the car, slammed the door, and gunned it. I didn't stop until I reached Blanco, where the lights of the gas station felt like salvation. The kid at the counter looked up when I came in. He had that pale, sunburned face you see on every hill country teenager. I told him I'd just seen the windmill turning. He gave me a strange look, then said, "You shouldn't stop out there." "Why not?" I asked. "Because it remembers people." I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He said people who stop to watch it end up hearing their own deaths. Not predictions, not prophecies, they're exact deaths. The ones they're destined for. Some folks go mad trying to change what they heard. Others vanish. He said his uncle had gone missing after pulling over there one night, left the truck running and the door open. They found his footprints leading up to the windmill, but none coming back. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't stop shaking. The noise I'd heard had felt too real, too specific. I drove home to San Antonio and tried to forget it, but I couldn't sleep. The next few nights I dreamed of the windmill turning, slow and backward, its blades grinding through clouds of dust. I dreamed I was standing beneath it, looking up, and it whispered my name again, clearer this time. Then I saw headlights, a wet road, a crash I couldn't stop. By the fifth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I'd go back, prove it was just wind and imagination. It was near midnight when I reached the ridge again. The sky was overcast, the moon hiding behind thick clouds. I parked on the shoulder and killed the lights. The darkness felt deeper than it should have, like the road had slipped out of the real world and into something hollow. At first, the windmill was still. Then as I stepped out, it began to move. Slow, heavy turns, each groan of metal sounding like a word. I walked toward it, past the fence line, my flashlight flickering. I didn't remember turning it off, but suddenly I was standing there in complete darkness, hearing only the windmill and my breathing. The whisper came again, and this time I could understand it. It told me the day, the hour, and the place. A stretch of wet asphalt, headlights cutting through rain, a curve too sharp to see. My own voice crying out just before the sound of metal tearing. I felt every detail as if it had already happened. When I came to, I was lying beside my car. The engine was running. The windmill was still. I don't know how long I'd been out, but dawn was breaking. I drove home without looking back. For weeks, I avoided that road. I even tried to leave town for a while, thinking I could outrun whatever curse I'd picked up out there. But last month, I had to drive to Austin again. I told myself I'd take I-35 this time. But there was a wreck near New Braunfels. Traffic backed up for miles. I got impatient, took the exit toward Canyon Lake, and before I knew it, I was on the backbone again. The air was heavy with rain. The sky flashed in the distance. I felt that same chill, that same wrong stillness, and then, just as I came around the bend, I saw headlights veering into my lane. They say the road was slick. They say I must have overcorrected. They say my car hit the limestone embankment and rolled twice before landing upside down. The witnesses told the troopers the windmill was turning that night, even in the rain. They said it spun harder than they'd ever seen, creaking and shrieking against the storm like it was laughing. And if you drive out there now, on a calm night when the air is still, you might hear it too, the whisper beneath the turning blades, the one that says your name before telling you how you'll die. The rain came down in thick gray sheets that blurred the world into a smear of motion and sound. The drifter, who had stopped going by any name years ago, trudged along the broken asphalt of an unmarked Texas road. His jeans were soaked to the skin, his boots filled with cold water, and every step was a reminder of how long he'd been walking without purpose. The storm had rolled in sudden, fierce, and absolute. He had seen the house through the curtain of rain, a hulking two-story structure on the edge of what might have once been a farm, or maybe a small estate. It sat behind a warped fence half swallowed by weeds. The windows were boarded up and the front porch sagged under the weight of neglect. He hadn't planned to break in. He just wanted a roof, something to keep the water off him for the night. The place looked abandoned. No lights, no sign of life, not even the ghost of a car in the overgrown driveway. He pushed the gate and it gave a long, dragging groan, the sound like something exhaling after years of silence. The porch creaked under his weight, but he found the front door locked tight. Around back, though, one of the boards had been pried loose from a small window, just enough for him to force it wider and slip through. He landed in what must have been the kitchen, a room that smelled faintly of mold and something older, something that reminded him of rot in a crawlspace. The light was dim, just the occasional flash of lightning through cracks in the boards. The house was bare, except for a few forgotten things: a toppled chair, a rusted tin coffee can, and a refrigerator so ancient it had the rounded corners of another century. He found a spot in the corner and sat down on his pack. The sound of the storm outside drowned out everything else. He unrolled a thin blanket and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. When he woke up, it was still dark, but the rain had stopped. He could hear the soft dripping of water from the gutters outside, the way it made a rhythm against the silence. For a moment, he didn't move. Something felt wrong. It took a while before he realized the smell had changed. The air was colder now, too still, too thick, and there was a faint sound like a sigh coming from somewhere deep in the house. He stood, every muscle in his body alert. He reached for his flashlight, a small one he kept in his coat pocket, and flicked it on. The beam cut across the kitchen, and that was when his stomach turned over. The doorway to the hall, he could have sworn it had been just a few feet from where he'd been sitting, was now several yards away. The distance between him and it had stretched. He blinked, thinking maybe it was the darkness or his eyes playing tricks on him. But when he walked toward it, it kept moving back, like a dream where you can never quite reach the thing you're running toward. Then suddenly, without any sound or shift, it was right there again, inches from his face. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. He tried to steady it. The hallway beyond was longer than it should have been. He remembered glimpsing it the night before, a short corridor with maybe 2 doors. Now it seemed to run far into the dark, too far for a house this size. The air was colder here, and it smelled faintly metallic, like blood or wet copper. He stepped forward. The floorboards moaned under his weight. Each step sounded like it went deeper than it should have, like something hollow beneath the house was echoing him. He tried one of the doors, a small one on the right. It opened easily. The room inside was empty except for a bed frame with no mattress, a window boarded up from the outside, and a faded wallpaper pattern of flowers that had nearly vanished with age. He turned back toward the hallway. That's when he noticed another door on the opposite side that hadn't been there before. He was sure of it. He'd just looked that way seconds ago. He stared at it, and the longer he did, the more it seemed to breathe. Not in any exaggerated way, just a subtle expanding and contracting of the wood, as though the door were inhaling slowly. He stepped closer, the flashlight shaking now. He put his hand on the doorknob, hesitated, then turned it. The hinges made a slow, sticky sound. The room beyond was pitch black, colder than anywhere else in the house. He leaned in and shone the light inside. The beam revealed something impossible, another hallway. It looked almost identical to the one he'd just come from, but the wallpaper was different, newer somehow, less faded, like the house was aging backward in that direction. He whispered to himself, "You're tired. That's all." His voice didn't sound right here. The walls seemed to swallow the sound before it could echo back. He took one step in, and the door behind him shut with a deep, heavy click. He spun around, grabbed the knob, and pulled, but it wouldn't move. The metal was freezing cold, burning his palm. He tried to force it open, but the frame felt alive under his hands, like muscle tightening. He dropped his pack and banged on the wood, shouting now, the sound vanishing before it reached his own ears. Panic surged through him, sharp and choking. Then, just as suddenly, the door creaked open on its own. The hallway beyond was not the one he had come from. It was narrower now, the walls closer, bending inward slightly. The air felt heavy, pressing against his skin. He stepped through because there was nowhere else to go. The house was silent except for the slow groan of wood shifting, breathing. He could hear faint thuds somewhere in the distance, like footsteps above him or inside the walls. He kept moving. Every few yards there was another door, each one leading to rooms that shouldn't exist. A child's bedroom filled with headless dolls arranged in a circle, a bathroom where the mirror reflected a different part of the house, a dining room with a long table set for a meal that had long since rotted into black sludge. He thought about breaking a window, but the moment he tried, the glass rippled under the hammer of his flashlight instead of shattering. It was like hitting water that wouldn't splash. The window looked out onto nothing. Not darkness, not the yard, just blank emptiness. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't work right in the house. His stomach twisted with hunger and fear, and his mind began to slip between exhaustion and dread. He found himself in a room he hadn't seen before, a small den with walls covered in framed photographs. He moved closer, shining the flashlight on them. At first they looked like old family portraits, and a man, a woman, a little girl. Then he noticed something in the background of each one, himself, standing in the distance, watching. He stumbled back, breathing hard. The beam of the flashlight flickered and went out. He smacked it with his palm until it came back to life, but when it did, the photos were gone. The walls were bare. He turned to leave, but the door had disappeared again. There was only wall where it had been. His chest tightened and he pressed his hand against the surface. It was warm, pulsing faintly. He pushed harder and the wall seemed to push back. He could feel the rhythm of a heartbeat, slow and steady. The house was alive. Something moved behind him. A whisper close to his ear, though no breath came with it. He spun around, shining the light wildly. There was nothing there. The whisper came again. Softer this time, a woman's voice saying something he couldn't understand. Then a child's laughter, faint and echoing from somewhere deep within the walls. He ran then, not caring where. The hallway shifted beneath his feet, floors slanting, doors appearing and vanishing as he moved. He caught glimpses of shapes at the edges of his light. Tall, shadowed figures watching from corners. One of them reached out as he passed, fingers impossibly long, brushing against his sleeve. The touch was ice. He finally burst into what looked like the living room again. The front door was there, wide open, rain still falling outside as if no time had passed. He didn't stop to question it. He ran through, out into the mud, gasping for air. The house behind him stood silent, unchanged. He didn't stop running until the shape of it vanished behind the trees. He made it to the highway by morning, hitchhiked into the next town, and didn't look back once. 3 days later, when the sheriff and his deputy went to check the house, and because a man at the diner had told them some drifter had broken into the old Vance place again, they found the boards on the windows exactly as they'd been for decades. The doors were nailed shut, dust thick on the floor. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Except for one thing. In the kitchen, against the wall near a torn blanket and an old pack, the boards had buckled outward like the house had grown an inch in the night. The old ranch sat between two hills of limestone and dying mesquite, an hour west of Abilene. Locals called it the Harlow Place, though nobody with that name had been alive for decades. I first saw it when I was 17, a shape of splintered wood and sagging fence wire on the horizon, something forgotten by time and wind. My uncle, who raised cattle 2 counties over, warned me not to step near the place. "The fences sing at night," he said. "If you ever hear them, don't listen too long." He said it in the kind of voice old men use when they've already made up their minds that you won't listen anyway. I didn't, of course. That summer, heat rolled through the plains like punishment. The air shimmered with the smell of dust and mesquite sap. I drove an old Ford truck I bought for $400 from a man missing 3 fingers and a conscience. The radio barely worked, but the headlights cut enough through the dark to get me where I wasn't supposed to go. I drove past midnight with only the hum of tires for company, following the thin dirt road that led toward the Harlow Ranch. When I stopped, the silence was thick enough to chew. The grass was knee-high and brittle under my boots. The moon hung, crooked, bright enough to show the silver stretch of barbed wire that surrounded the entire property. I walked closer and noticed how the wire wasn't still. It shimmered barely, as if a faint vibration ran through it. When I got within arm's reach, the hum reached my ears, a low metallic tone, soft but constant, like a tuning fork left to ring. I thought it might have been the wind, though there wasn't any. I leaned closer, listening, and felt the sound crawl into my skull. It wasn't just a noise, it had a pattern, a pulse, almost like music that hadn't been written by human hands. I should have turned back then, but I pressed my fingers to the wire. The vibration shot through my arm, up my shoulder, into the base of my skull. It didn't hurt, not exactly. It just made my thoughts feel crooked. When I let go, the sound clung to me, faint as an echo in my teeth. I left that night, but the humming followed me home. I couldn't sleep. When I closed my eyes, I heard it under the mattress springs, in the walls, in my own heartbeat. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself a lot of things. By the third night, I went back. The ranch hadn't changed, but I had. I brought a flashlight and a pair of wire cutters. When I reached the fence, the hum was louder, a strange harmony now. 2 notes weaving together in the dark. My flashlight flickered and died when I crossed the first line of barbed wire. The sound grew thick, almost visible in the air, and I could feel it beneath my skin like something alive. I walked toward the barn that slumped near the center of the property. Its roof was half gone, its doors chained shut. The closer I got, the more the humming shifted into something that almost sounded like voices, dozens of them straining against the metal. I put my ear to the barn door. The wood was cold. Inside, the hum rose and fell like breathing. I heard something scraping, faint but steady, like a boot dragging through dust. When I whispered hello, the sound stopped. Then, just as quick, something answered, a soft, wet cough followed by a low hum, matching the tone of the wire outside. I don't remember unlocking the chains, but somehow they were off. The door creaked open and the smell hit me. Metal and rot, old animal blood dried into the dirt. My flashlight flared once more before dying completely, but I saw enough. In the center of the barn stood a tangled web of wire, wound around posts and beams like veins of rust. Shapes hung from it, small at first, then larger, almost human-sized. I stepped closer and saw what they were. Animals, coyotes, rabbits, a horse, all strung up in the wire, bodies half mummified by time. But their mouths were open, and from each one a thin strand of barbed wire ran down their throats, deep enough to vanish. When I moved, the entire web shuddered and began to hum. The pitch climbed until I thought my skull would split. I stumbled backward, and the hum became words. Not words exactly, something older, made of sound and intent. I heard my name, I swear I did, twisted in the vibration like a fly caught in silk. My body moved without my permission. I found myself reaching for the wire again. My hands closed around it, and I felt 1,000 voices flood my veins. They were singing, not songs, but screams bent into melody. And beneath it all was the faint rhythm of human breath. I don't remember much after that. I woke up the next morning outside the barn, my throat raw, my shirt soaked in blood. My lips ached like I'd been singing for hours. The sun was up, the hum gone. I left that place half crawling, half stumbling, and drove until the gas ran out somewhere near Sweetwater. A rancher found me on the roadside, delirious and muttering. He said I kept humming even in my sleep. Years passed. I moved states, worked odd jobs, tried to forget. But every few years the sound comes back. It starts in my jaw, a faint buzz like teeth grinding together. Then the dreams return. I see the barn, the wire, the hanging shapes. I hear that awful harmony, the way it folds itself around your thoughts until you can't tell where the sound ends and you begin. 3 nights ago, it came again. Louder than ever. I woke up humming, my pillow streaked with blood from my bitten tongue. I decided I'd had enough. I drove back to the Harlow Ranch, though I barely recognized the land. The hills were lower, the dirt road washed out. The barn was nothing but a skeleton of beams. But the fence was still there, gleaming in the moonlight, humming like before. Only now it wasn't alone. Every stretch of wire sang a different note, and together they formed a chord so pure and awful, it froze me where I stood. There were figures in the dark, swaying behind the fence. At first I thought they were shadows, but they moved with the rhythm, heads tilting as the wire thrummed through them. I realized then they were people, half buried in the dust, wrapped in barbed coils that ran straight into their throats. Their mouths opened and closed with the hum, and when I stepped closer, one turned toward me. Its face was torn and pale, but the eyes were familiar. My uncle's eyes. He opened his mouth wider, and the sound that came out was not his voice, but the same metallic harmony that had haunted me for years. The wires tightened around my boots. I didn't even feel the barbs cut through at first. The vibration rose through my legs, my spine, my skull. It wanted me to join, to sing. I tried to fight it, but the air was thick with the sound. I fell forward, hands against the fence, and the wire bit deep. The hum swallowed my scream. The last thing I saw before the world went white was my reflection in the rusted metal, mouth open, throat bleeding, joining the chorus. If you drive past the Harlow Ranch now, you might hear it. Just a faint metallic drone carried on the wind. Don't stop. Don't listen. Because once you hear the barbed wire choir, you'll start to hum along, and it won't stop until your throat is nothing but a wound that sings back. In the small forgotten town of Blythe, Texas, the cotton fields stretch for miles, bleached and brittle under a sky that never seems to change. They say the soil out there is cursed, that nothing grows right since the fire back in '64. Most folks steer clear of the old plantation road after dark. They say if you walk that way when the moon is out, you might see her, the girl in the cotton field. It starts with the sound of wind whispering through dry stalks, like 1,000 hands brushing against each other. Then you hear the faint swish of fabric, a soft dragging noise that doesn't match the rhythm of the wind. People who've seen her claim she's barefoot, her long white dress hanging heavy with dust, her hair clinging to her shoulders like wet grass. She doesn't look at you, not right away. She walks, slow and deliberate, as if retracing steps she's taken 1,000 times before. There used to be a farmhouse out there, owned by the Harlans. Back in the early 1900s, they ran one of the largest cotton plantations in the county. The patriarch, Isaac Harlan, was known for his temper and his devotion to profit. They say he worked his field hands until they dropped, and when they couldn't stand anymore, he found replacements fast. His only daughter, Lydia, was said to be delicate, shy, always staring out the window toward the fields as if she heard something calling to her. When she turned 17, she disappeared one night without a trace. Folks searched for weeks. They found her footprints in the dirt, leading into the cotton rows, and beside them another set, smaller, like those of a child. They stopped halfway through the field. No body was ever found. For a while, the Harlans kept up appearances. The cotton was picked, the bales shipped, the house kept shining white against the horizon. But whispers began spreading, workers seeing someone standing between the rows at night, a pale figure watching them. One by one, the field hands left. Then came the fire. No one knows how it started, but the house went up fast, flames turning the night sky orange. The family was trapped inside. Some say they heard a scream that wasn't from any of the Harlans. When the sun rose the next morning, only the chimneys stood. The land was sold and resold, but no one stayed long. Cows went missing, tools vanished. The soil itself seemed wrong, harder, drier, as if it resisted being turned. By the 1980s, the property belonged to a man named Walter Griggs. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He bought the land cheap and planted again. The first harvest went well enough. But one October evening, while inspecting the irrigation lines, Walter saw something white moving deep among the rows. He thought it was a lost dog, maybe a stray sheet caught in the wind. Then it stood up. He told his wife later that the girl looked about 16, her face pale as bone, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond him. She was humming a tune, soft, broken, familiar. When he called out to her, she turned and started walking away. Walter followed. He called again, and again she didn't answer. The cotton brushed his arms, sharp and dry, and the sky darkened faster than it should have. His wife found his flashlight the next morning near the center of the field, still on. His tracks went in circles, overlapping and confused, and beside them, Faint but visible were the prints of bare feet. No one ever found him. The sheriff's men brought dogs. The dogs refused to step into the field. One bolted, howling, when the wind shifted. They fenced the place off after that, but every few years someone gets brave or stupid enough to test the story. Teenagers mostly, daring each other to see the ghost. The pattern is always the same: laughter, flashlights, nervous talk, then silence. Sometimes they come back pale, shaken, unable to explain what they saw. Sometimes they don't come back at all. It was in late August, the air thick and unmoving, when Ben Carter decided to prove it was all superstition. He worked at the gas station off Route 9, spent most of his nights listening to old truckers spin tall tales. The cotton field story got under his skin. He figured there had to be a logical explanation. Heat haze, local hysteria, something like that. He took his camera, a thermos of coffee, and parked his truck just off the road. He waited until the moon rose high, turning the field silver. For a long while nothing moved except the cotton stalk swaying gently. Then near the far end he saw her. She was walking slowly between the rows, her dress glowing faintly. Ben steadied his camera and zoomed in. Through the lens, her face looked wrong, too smooth, like porcelain. Her eyes were dark hollows and her lips didn't move, though he could hear her humming, a thin, reedy tune that made his chest tighten. He whispered her name without realizing it. Lydia, and she stopped. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. The humming stopped. She smiled. The camera fell from his hand. He started running, but the rows seemed endless. The moonlight flickered between the stalks, and he could hear footsteps behind him, soft, unhurried, matching his pace. He tripped, scrambled up, and felt something cold brush his neck. The smell of smoke filled his lungs. He looked back and saw nothing but the field. They found his truck 2 days later, the door open, engine off. His footprints led into the field. Halfway through, another set appeared beside his, bare feet, small, delicate. And then, both sets vanished. The sheriff tried to close the place off again, but it never stays closed. Every season, someone reports lights or music or a girl standing by the fence line. Always the same description. Long hair, white dress, no shoes. Locals say the land remembers. They say Lydia Harlan never left those rows, and every few years she finds someone to walk with her, someone foolish enough to follow. If you drive past on a still night, keep your windows rolled up. Don't look too long at the fields. And if you see a girl waving from the cotton, don't stop. Because if you do, your footprints will be the next ones beside hers, and the field never forgets its dead. Lake Meredith had been shrinking for years, a ghost of what it once was, a cracked basin surrounded by brittle grass and forgotten fishing piers. In the summer of 2023, it pulled back farther than anyone could remember, revealing things that were never meant to be seen. Old car frames rusted out, a refrigerator door with bullet holes, the skeleton of a dock that had collapsed decades ago, and one house slouched against the mud like it had been holding its breath underwater all this time. The house wasn't on any map. It didn't match any record in Hutchinson County. But one Saturday, 4 teenagers from Fritch, Mason, his girlfriend Ellie, their friend Connor, and Mason's cousin June, decided to see it up close. They drove out in Mason's dad's pickup, cutting through the dirt roads that spidered around the lake's south edge. The air smelled like algae and gasoline. Gulls circled above the exposed lake bed. It was almost dusk when they parked on the cracked shoreline and started walking. The house was 100 yards out, half sunk in the muck. Its roof leaned low, shingles peeling like scabs. A broken chimney jutted out at an angle. The front door was caked with mud, warped inward as if something had pushed from inside. Connor grinned, his phone already out. This is going to be insane. First dibs on the TikTok caption. Ellie rolled her eyes but followed him, picking her way through the sludge. June stayed close to Mason, quiet and watching. She didn't like how still the air was, how even the birds had stopped crying. When they reached the porch, Mason tried the door. It didn't move. He kicked it once and the frame cracked, letting out a damp smell like pond water and mildew. They stepped inside. The first thing they noticed was how dry it was. No mold, no dripping ceiling, no puddles, just dust and silence. Furniture sat where it always had been. An old couch, a table, a lamp. But everything was coated in a fine layer of gray. Connor's flashlight swept across the walls. Jesus, it's like time froze in here. Ellie drifted to a bookshelf and brushed at the spines of old photo albums. When she opened one, the pages were blank. Just empty photo sleeves. June found a staircase leading down. There's a basement. They all followed her, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. The air grew colder as they descended. The smell changed too, metallic, sharp, almost like pennies. At the bottom was a wide room half carved into stone. Mason's light landed on something along the far wall, frames. Dozens of them. Some hanging, some stacked. Holy hell, Connor said, stepping closer. These are portraits. They were photographs, each behind glass, all perfectly clean despite the dust upstairs. The first frame showed a woman in her 30s, her eyes closed like she was asleep. The next showed an old man sitting in a chair, his expression calm, peaceful. Then another, a boy no older than 10. Then Mason stopped. His hand trembled as his light caught the next set of frames. They were looking at themselves. Connor, Ellie, June, Mason, all four of them staring back. The photos were crisp, well lit, as if taken in a studio. They were wearing clothes they didn't own, standing against a backdrop of the same house. At the bottom of each frame was a small brass plate, engraved with a date. June stepped closer to hers. October 12, 2024, she read. That's next year. Connor laughed, but it came out thin. Okay, that's a joke, right? Some artist prank? Someone edited our faces. Ellie shook her head slowly. These are real photos, Connor. Look at the shadows, the reflections. That's us. Mason backed away from the wall, his breath shallow. He turned and shone his light around the room. More frames. Dozens more. People they didn't recognize. Some plates had dates from years ago, some from this year, and some still blank. Let's get out, Mason said. Now. But as they started for the stairs, a sound rolled through the room, a low hum like a generator far away. The light bulbs overhead flickered on one by one. Connor froze. Where's the power coming from? Ellie whispered, there's no wires. The hum grew louder. The bulbs steadied, glowing with a sickly yellow light. Then the air seemed to thicken, pressing against their chests. The photos on the wall trembled in their frames. June screamed first. Her photo, the one of her from the future, was changing. Her head tilted slightly, then her eyes opened. Not the real June's eyes, but the ones in the picture. They turned, focusing directly on her. The others' photos began to move too, their frozen faces twitching, blinking, smiling faintly. Mason grabbed June's arm. Run! They bolted for the stairs, but halfway up, water started seeping through the steps. Cold, murky water rising fast. It poured from the walls, from the ceiling, from nowhere. Connor slipped, tumbling backward into the basement as the water climbed higher. Connor! Mason yelled, reaching down, but Connor was already thrashing, shouting something before he disappeared beneath the black surface. They reached the main floor, soaked and gasping. The house groaned, shaking on its foundation. Outside, lightning flashed across the lakebed, though there were no clouds above. The truck was barely visible in the distance. Go! Mason shouted, dragging Ellie by the hand. June followed, slipping in the mud. Behind them, the house's door slammed shut. The lights inside flickered off. By the time they reached the truck, the water had stopped rising. When Mason turned to look back, the house was gone. Just ripples spreading across the mud where it had been. They drove home in silence, shaking, their headlights cutting through the dark. Connor never came out of the lake. Search teams found nothing. No body, no footprints, no trace the house had ever existed. Months passed. The three of them didn't talk much. They avoided the lake. Then, one morning in October of the next year, June woke up to a sound on her porch, a small wet thud. When she opened the door, she found a frame leaning against it, wrapped in a thin plastic sheet. Inside was a photograph of her, taken from her bedroom window. The brass plate at the bottom read October 12, 2024. When the police came, she was gone. 2 days later, Ellie received hers. Then Mason. Connor's body surfaced a week later near the dam, his skin pale, his eyes open. The coroner said he'd been underwater for nearly a year, but somehow his body hadn't decayed. The lake rose again after that, swallowing the mud and the debris. Locals said they saw lights under the surface at night, flickering softly like candles behind windows. Some said the house was still down there, waiting for the next drought. Others said it never left at all, that it only sank deeper, room by room, frame by frame, filling itself with new faces for the year to come. On County Road 6, the radio tower stood like a relic of something half-remembered, half-cursed. It was a narrow skeleton of rusted steel, the kind of structure that hummed when the wind pressed through its ribs. And when lightning struck nearby, it glowed like a dead god's finger reaching from the ground. Locals in Denton County said it hadn't broadcast a signal since 1998, when a man named Carl Withers climbed the tower during a thunderstorm and never came down. They found one of his boots fused to the metal near the top and nothing else. Since then, it had just been there, looming behind a curtain of cedar trees, humming when the weather turned. It was October when the first broadcast started again. Every evening, just after sunset, a faint static would seep through radios across a 30-mile radius. The sound came whether the dial was turned to a station or not. Then came a voice, monotone, broken, and old-fashioned, like something from a 1950s AM channel. It always began the same way. "Good evening, Denton County. This is your local report." People thought it was a prank until they realized the voice belonged to a girl who'd gone missing in 2011, Samantha Crow. Her parents recognized it instantly. She'd vanished walking home from a football game near that very stretch of County Road 6. The next night, a different voice came on. A man this time, slow and deliberate, reading names from a list. Local residents, businesses, and obituaries that hadn't happened yet. 2 days later, one of those names, Earl Benton, was found dead in his barn, crushed under a fallen beam. The sheriff's department called it coincidence, but the town knew better. I was covering that story for the Denton Ledger, a regional paper that had seen better days. I'd been with them for 12 years, long enough to learn that small towns keep their ghosts close. My editor wanted something with atmosphere, so I drove out to County Road 6, camera bag in the passenger seat, the map lit by the green glow of the dashboard. The road was narrow, cracked, lined with scrub oak and barbed wire. The tower came into view like a spine against the dying light. At its base stood a chain-link fence, mostly down, and a small shack that must have housed the generator once. The air smelled like copper and rain. I parked by the ditch and walked in. The tower moaned in the wind. I could hear faint music coming from somewhere, tinny, distant, like an old waltz playing underwater. I pressed my ear to the shack door. Inside, the music was clearer. The room was small, lined with broken equipment. Dust lay thick over the console, but one of the meters flickered. The transmitter was still plugged in, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. I reached for the dial, and as I did, the music cut out. A voice whispered through the static. My name. I froze. It said it again, Eli. Drawn out and low, as if whoever it was right behind the microphone, lips almost touching it. I backed away. My recorder in my pocket was still running. I played it back later, back in town. There was my name, plain as day, followed by a faint hum, then a sentence so quiet I almost missed it. Storm coming. The next morning I went to see Sheriff McCaskill, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He said his deputies had been chasing reports of voices all over the county. Old folks' homes, truck stops, even the goddamn high school intercom, he said. Same thing every time. The missing ones reading the news. That night, the station broadcast again. I recorded the whole thing. A woman's voice this time, calm, confident, reading headlines about a chemical spill near Lake Ray Roberts, a car crash on Highway 77, a barn fire on Shiloh Road. None of those things had happened yet. But by morning they had. The fire burned a family of 3 alive. The sheriff called it an act of vandalism. I called it prophecy. I went back out there 2 nights later, right before midnight. The sky was boiling with clouds, and the tower's lights blinked weakly like dying eyes. The static came on again, and I tuned my car radio to it. The voice was different, male, deep, too familiar. It was my own. It was me reading the news. My voice said that a journalist from Denton was found dead near the County Road 6 tower, presumed struck by lightning during a thunderstorm. The broadcast ended with the same forecast. Storm coming. The rain began then, sudden and violent. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car. The light hit the tower, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, shapes inside the metal lattice like people climbing. Hundreds of them, overlapping, transparent. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. The wind screamed, and I heard the faint hum again, that same low tone that had whispered my name before. It grew louder, pulsing until my vision blurred. The air vibrated, and every hair on my arms stood up. I tried to run, but the mud sucked at my boots. The hum became a roar. Lightning struck the top of the tower, blinding white. I hit the ground hard. When I opened my eyes, the air was silent again. Smoke rose from the tower's frame, black against the flashing sky. The generator shack was gone, no trace of it, just a scorched patch of earth. My car was dead. I walked 5 miles before I saw another light. An old farmhouse where a man in overalls stood on the porch smoking. I told him what I'd seen. He just shook his head slowly. That tower, he said, was torn down 15 years ago. I didn't argue. I just stared back down the road, where I could still see the red blink of the tower's beacon, faint and steady through the rain. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. No record of any tower, no land deeds. County records showed nothing but empty pasture. But that night, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered. A low static filled the line, followed by my own recorded voice from the previous night. "Good evening, Denton County," it said. "This is your local report." Then silence. "It's been a week now. Every radio in my house turns itself on at dusk. Always the same forecast, always the same final words. Storm coming. And every time I look outside down County Road 6, I see the faint pulse of a red light in the distance calling me back." The air around Bonham Prison had always felt heavier than anywhere else in Texas. The building sat on the outskirts of town like a festering scar, its limestone walls crumbling beneath decades of neglect and rot. Locals said the place was cursed long before it was even built, that it was raised on land that used to be a burial ground for settlers who vanished during the Red River massacres of the 1800s. But what everyone remembered most were the shadows. They weren't just shadows, the inmates had said. They crawled. When the prison shut down in 1987, the official report cited structural decay and low funding, but everyone in Bonham knew that wasn't the truth. Too many guards had quit mid-shift. Too many inmates were found dead in their cells without a mark on them, faces twisted into silent screams. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but they all whispered about the same thing. The walls had eyes. 3 decades later, the place had become a magnet for urban explorers, ghost hunters, and amateur filmmakers. They came from Dallas, Sherman, even as far as Oklahoma, looking to prove that the legends were real. Most came back with nothing but grainy footage and bug bites, but a few never came back at all. When Kyle Drummond, a small-time YouTuber from Denton, decided to make his mark with a real paranormal investigation, Bonham Prison was his choice. He'd built a modest following doing night explorations in abandoned malls and farmhouses, but he wanted something darker. He brought 2 friends, Troy and Elena, along for the ride. They arrived one humid July evening just before sunset, the Texas sky bleeding orange behind the skeletal remains of the guard towers. Kyle's camera rolled as he narrated the approach, his voice trembling with forced enthusiasm. "We're standing outside Bonham Correctional Facility, shut down in '87 after a string of mysterious deaths. Locals say the shadows inside move on their own. We're about to find out." They entered through a gap in the outer wall, stepping over rusted rebar and weeds as thick as snakes. The air inside was cooler, heavy with the smell of mildew and iron. Their flashlights cut through long hallways of peeling paint and empty cells. Every sound, every drop of water, every crunch of debris echoed too long. Elena trailed behind, her camera pointed down the main corridor where graffiti covered every wall. "Feels wrong in here," she muttered. "Like it's watching us," Troy chuckled nervously. "It's a prison. It's supposed to feel wrong, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen moved just beyond the reach of their lights." The first sign came in cell block. D. Kyle was panning across a row of cells when his light flickered. On the playback, you could see it. The shadows on the far wall rippled like water, shifting slightly even as the flashlight beam stayed steady. They were vague at first, just darkness moving against darker stone, but then one of them stretched upward, slow and deliberate, until it matched the shape of Kyle himself. "Holy, did you see that?" he whispered, turning toward the wall. The shadow froze. Perfectly still. Troy laughed, thinking it was a trick of the light. He waved his arm. The shadow on the wall hesitated, then copied him. That stopped them cold. For the next hour, they tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was light from the doorway, maybe their own flashlights reflecting strangely. But as the sun outside died completely, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to gain confidence. They stopped waiting for movement. They began initiating it. In the old cafeteria, Elena's camera caught something none of them could explain. As she filmed the cracked murals and rusted trays, a black mass slid across the far wall, slow, deliberate, like oil running uphill. She didn't notice at first, not until the darkness touched her own shadow and it twitched, breaking from her body for a split second before snapping back. She screamed and dropped the camera. The footage showed her shadow stretching across the tiles, bending unnaturally as if trying to crawl away from her feet. When Troy picked up the camera, he swore under his breath. "Elena, your shadow, it's not lining up." They decided to leave then. Whatever game they had come to play had turned real, but Bonham Prison didn't want them to leave. Every corridor looked the same. The main exit they'd entered through was gone, or maybe they'd turned the wrong way. The map Kyle downloaded didn't match the layout anymore. Hallways twisted in on themselves. Cell doors that should have been sealed were now open, and every few minutes, one of them swore they heard footsteps following just behind. Troy kept muttering that it was just the echo. But the sound wasn't consistent. It stopped when they stopped, started when they moved. In the security control room, they found something that shouldn't have been there. The monitors still worked. They flickered to life on their own, screens glowing with static. Then slowly, one by one, images appeared. The three of them, captured from different angles around the prison, live footage that shouldn't have been possible since the power was cut decades ago. In one feed, Kyle stood facing the hall behind them, but in the reflection on the monitor, his shadow wasn't where it should have been. It stood several feet closer, head tilted, arms twitching like it was struggling to keep shape. That was when the lights went out. Elena screamed again, a raw animal sound, and Kyle fumbled with his flashlight. When the beam came back on, Troy was gone. His camera lay on the floor, lens cracked. They shouted his name, their voices bouncing off the concrete until it sounded like 100 others calling from the dark. Something brushed Kyle's leg, soft, cold, like smoke, and he swung the light down to see a dozen elongated shapes crawling toward him. They weren't cast by anything. They were moving on their own, pooling together into a thick black mass that pulsed with a faint rhythmic motion. Like breathing, Elena ran. Her camera caught only fragments. The hallways warping, walls bending like rubber, shadows spilling from the cracks in the floor. She stumbled down the main corridor, crying, begging for the exit. At one point she looked back, and her light caught Kyle's body standing perfectly still, his face blank, eyes open but empty. His shadow moved behind him, slow and deliberate, then detached completely, sliding across the floor toward her. The footage ended there. 2 weeks later, a group of local teenagers found the abandoned cameras near the entrance of Bonham Prison. The sheriff's office reviewed the footage but refused to release it publicly. What leaked online was enough to ignite endless debates, hoax, digital trickery, viral marketing. But the final minute of Elena's recording still defies explanation. The camera had fallen sideways, lens cracked but functional. In the dim light, you can see the empty corridor, quiet and still. Then, after several minutes, the wall opposite flickers. 3 shadows appear, one tall, one short, one with a ponytail. They move exactly like Kyle, Troy, and Elena had earlier, mimicking their gestures from hours before. Only there's no one there. No bodies, no lights, nothing casting them. They just stand, waiting, until the flashlight's battery finally dies and the screen fades to black. The prison remains sealed now, fenced off and condemned. But people still drive out to see it at night, hoping for a glimpse through the cracks in the wall. They say that if you shine a light just right, you'll see them moving, slow, deliberate, almost human. The crawling shadows of Bonham Prison still mimicking the living, still waiting for someone to step inside and give them form again. Lobo Field sat on the edge of a dying town called Waycross, Texas. It wasn't even a real town anymore. Not since the oil company shut down and the interstate rerouted 10 miles north. The school had been condemned for years, The windows smashed, the hallways eaten through with vines and mildew. But the football field remained. Locals said it still smelled like grass after a storm, though no one had mowed it in decades. The bleachers rusted, the scoreboard leaned to one side, and the faded sign still read, "Home of the Lobos." No one had played there since 1983, when the last game ended in tragedy, though no one ever agreed on what exactly happened that night. Most said the field just wasn't right, that it was cursed ground, or that the town buried something it shouldn't have when they built it. But to most, that was small-town talk. Until the spring of 2021, when the land was sold to a farmer named Henry McClellan, a quiet man in his 60s who'd just come back from caring for his brother in Oklahoma. He bought the property cheap, planning to flatten the old field and use it for winter wheat. No one told him not to. They probably figured he wouldn't listen anyway. Henry started plowing in late April just after dusk to avoid the heat. He said it was easier to see the soil under the tractor's lights. The first night went fine, until about 11 when he noticed something strange. Every time the tractor passed over the 50-yard line, he'd see a faint shimmer in the dirt behind him, like moonlight catching something metallic. He thought it was glass or maybe old debris from the bleachers. But when he stopped the tractor and climbed down, there was nothing. Just freshly turned soil and the smell of grass. The second night, the shimmer came back, brighter this time. He stopped again, walked the field with a flashlight, and noticed something odd. Faint lines in the dirt, curved and chalk-like, running from one end zone to the other. It looked almost like someone had drawn new yard lines, but beneath the soil. He rubbed at them with his boot and saw the faintest glimmer of light. Not reflection, illumination. The ground itself was glowing. He called it a trick of the eyes, maybe phosphorus runoff from fertilizer or old stadium wiring. But that night when he went home, he couldn't stop seeing it. Those lines under his eyelids glowing white and faintly pulsing like veins. The next night, Henry brought his nephew Travis, a mechanic from town, to see for himself. They drove the tractor out just past sunset, headlights cutting across the overgrown grass. The air was hot and still, crickets loud enough to hurt. Around 10, the glow started again. This time Travis saw it too. The faint shape of a field emerging under the dirt, the 50-yard line, the end zones, even the faint outline of the Lobos logo near midfield. And then just as they stood staring, they both heard it. A low hum, rhythmic, almost like a crowd in the distance. Travis laughed at first, saying it must be the wind in the trees. But there was no wind. Then the hum turned into something clearer. A chant. A crowd's chant. "Lobos, Lobos." Henry said later that he could feel the vibration through his boots, like the earth was alive beneath him. They ran back to the tractor, but as they climbed up, a flicker of movement caught Travis's eye. At the far end of the field, where the old scoreboard still stood, the bulbs blinked to life, faded and half dead but glowing all the same. Home 13, visitors 0. The numbers flickered, buzzed, then froze. The hum rose louder, like thousands of unseen voices shouting in unison, echoing from underground. They left the tractor there and drove straight back to the farmhouse. Henry called the sheriff, but when deputies came out the next morning, there was nothing to see. The dirt was flat, cold, and dry. No lights, no sounds. The old scoreboard was dark again. They told him to stop drinking at night and left it at that. But the field didn't stop. For the next week, anyone driving past after dark swore they could see the lights from the highway. Faint lines moving under the soil like ghostly players running plays only they could see. One man, a trucker passing through from Laredo, said he thought it was a game. He pulled over, thinking some kids had fixed up the old field, but when he got closer, there was no one there, just light moving beneath the dirt, shapes that looked like men tackling, running, blocking, all made of pale green glow. He said the air smelled like ozone and burnt grass and that he heard cheering, distant but loud. When he told folks at the diner the next morning, no one laughed. Travis went back a week later against Henry's wishes. He brought a camera and a shovel. Around midnight, he set up near the 50-yard line and started recording. The video, what little was recovered, showed nothing at first, just dark soil under the moonlight. Then the ground began to pulse. Lines of light formed and the camera shook. A faint, distorted roar filled the audio. Then the picture warped, like static from an old TV, and shapes appeared, figures moving under the ground, outlines of helmets and pads glowing faintly as they clashed and ran. The video cut off there. When police found the camera, Travis was gone. They searched for 3 days. Found nothing but his hat near the old goalpost. Henry stopped talking after that. He left town 2 weeks later, sold the land to the county, and no one's seen him since. The county put up a fence, posted no trespassing signs, and let it rot. But the lights kept coming. Even now, on certain nights when the wind is still and the sky is clear, you can see the faint green shimmer under the soil. Locals say if you stand quiet enough, you can hear the crowd again. The phantom announcer's voice cutting through the static, calling plays no living man remembers. Last year, some college kids from Austin came out to film a ghost documentary. They ignored the warnings, hopped the fence, and brought their equipment out just before midnight. Their footage showed something no one could explain. The lights came on again, brighter than ever. The figures under the field moved fast, like men playing a real game. And then near the end of the recording, something changed. The camera tilted down, and for a moment, the glowing shapes seemed to notice them. All the motion stopped. Every figure froze. Then, one by one, the lights turned toward the camera, those faceless shapes facing up through the soil. The footage ended when the camera fell sideways and the lens filled with light. They never came back for it. When deputies found the gear the next morning, the ground was smooth again. No footprints, no signs of digging. The scoreboard, though, was lit. Home, 13. Visitors, 0. The bulbs buzzed faintly, and the clock read, 4th quarter, U013 remaining. They unplugged the power source, but it kept glowing until dawn. Waycross is mostly empty now. Just a few stubborn families left, the gas station and the diner by the tracks. Folks don't talk much about Lobo Field anymore, but every now and then, when the air smells of burnt grass and lightning, someone claims to see movement under the soil out by the fence. And they say if you listen close enough, you can hear the sound of cleats on turf, the whistle of a ref, and the roar of a crowd that never left. Whatever happened that night in '83, they never stopped playing. They're still out there, running their final game, trying to finish what death didn't let them, and the scoreboard still waits, humming softly in the dark, reminding anyone who dares to look that the Lobos never lost. The Garland Mill had been empty since 1991, though no one in town could ever agree on why it closed. Some said there was a fire that never got reported. Others said the owner went bankrupt overnight, disappeared into the desert with a suitcase full of stolen cash. What was certain was that the place still stood 3 miles east of downtown Garland, off a road no one maintained, its broken windows glinting like the eyes of 100 dead things when the sun hit just right. And inside, at least according to the locals, it wasn't really empty. It had hundreds of mannequins left behind, propped in corners, slumped at tables lined along the walls like pale workers frozen mid-shift. When I first saw it, I was driving through Garland on my way to a photography job in Dallas. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm a freelance photojournalist who's spent too long chasing dying towns, abandoned diners, and the places people stop talking about. Someone at a bar told me about the mill, said it was haunted, said the mannequins moved when no one was around. I laughed, of course, but I've always had a weakness for the grotesque, the way silence feels heavier in a place that used to hum with machines. So the next morning, I parked by the rusted gate, hopped it, and started walking up the cracked concrete drive. The front door was chained, but a window near the side loading bay was already shattered. Inside, it smelled of oil, mold, and old fabric. Dust hung in the light like snow. The first thing I saw was a row of mannequins, about 20 of them, all missing heads. Their arms were positioned strangely, some reaching forward, some up, some bent behind their backs like they'd been twisted mid-pose. Each had a tag tied to its wrist, yellow and brittle. Section B, Floor 2, Inspection. It looked like someone had been cataloging them before leaving in a hurry. As I moved deeper, the floorboards creaked and bits of insulation fluttered down from the ceiling. A loom sat broken in the corner, threads still stretched between its teeth like veins. My flashlight beam found more mannequins, full-bodied ones this time, with cracked paint for skin and glassy eyes too clean for the rest of the building. Some wore remnants of uniforms, gray shirts with Garland Mill embroidered above the breast. They stood in small groups, facing each other, like workers frozen mid-conversation. One had its hand resting lightly on another's shoulder as if to comfort it. I started taking photos. Every shot was eerie. No matter how I framed it, the mannequin seemed posed for me. I told myself it was just good composition and coincidence. But then I noticed something odd. In each photo, when I glanced at my digital screen, 1 or 2 of them appeared to be turned slightly, not quite matching what I'd seen through the lens. Their arms or heads had shifted just a fraction. I blamed my nerves or maybe the wind sneaking through the broken windows. By afternoon, I'd made it to the upper floor. The stairs groaned but held. Up there, it was worse. The mannequins were everywhere, hundreds of them. Some piled like corpses, others standing in rows facing the far wall. The air was colder, like the building exhaled frost. The wall they faced was blank, nothing but flaking paint and a dark stain near the floor. The strange part was how every mannequin's head was tilted the same way, as if they were staring at a single point, an empty corner that offered them nothing in return. I spent nearly an hour there, circling the crowd, snapping photos. I found a small office in back with papers scattered on the desk, a ledger half filled with names and product numbers. The last date written was March 17, 1991. Then nothing. I thought about the rumor that everyone left overnight. I tried to imagine what would make people walk away from a factory and never come back for their things, not even to collect their tools or money. When I came back to the main room, something had changed. I didn't notice at first, but as I adjusted my tripod, I realized the mannequins weren't where I'd left them. The front row was closer to me by a few feet, maybe more. I hadn't heard a sound, but there they were, closer. I turned off the camera and stared for a full minute. They didn't move. The silence was absolute. I could hear my own breathing. I whispered a nervous laugh, backed away, and told myself maybe I was misremembering their positions. Then a noise, faint like fabric stretching. My flashlight flickered. When it came back, I saw one of them. A female form with a chipped cheek and missing fingers was now turned directly toward me. The others still faced the wall. My heart started hammering. I took a step back, then another. My boot hit something soft. I looked down and saw a mannequin head lying on the floor, its painted eyes staring upward. I hadn't seen it before. That was enough for me. I grabbed my bag and started toward the stairs. But as I reached the doorway, something in me froze. I looked back once, just once, and saw that every mannequin in that room was now facing me. Hundreds of them, shoulder to shoulder, their pale faces turned in perfect unison. I didn't hear them move. They were just there, watching. The corner they'd been staring at was empty now. I bolted. I don't remember how I got down the stairs or out the window or back to the car. When I finally started the engine, I didn't look back until I hit the main road. The mill sat still in the rearview mirror, quiet, harmless. That night at the motel, I uploaded the photos. The first few were fine, haunting in a beautiful way. But then as I clicked through, I noticed figures in places I hadn't seen anyone standing. Blurred silhouettes behind the mannequins, tall and thin, shaped almost like people but darker, less defined. In one image, a shadowed figure stood among them, a head taller than the rest, and its eyes weren't glass. They were reflecting the flash of my camera. In the next frame, it was gone. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I decided to delete the photos. But when I opened the folder, it was empty. The thumbnails were gone. The only file left was one I didn't name, just a string of numbers and letters. I opened it without thinking. It was a photo of me, taken from the upper floor of the mill, standing in front of the mannequins. My camera was raised, the flash mid-burst. Behind me, they were all turned toward me, and in the corner where they used to face, something black was unfolding from the wall, long and human-shaped, reaching. I left Garland that morning, drove straight through to Houston without stopping. I told myself it was just my mind, exhaustion, tricks of light and dust. But 2 weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph printed on glossy paper. It was me, asleep in my motel bed the same night after visiting the mill, and in the reflection of the window behind me I could see them. Hundreds of pale faces outside, lined up in the parking lot, staring in. I moved apartments after that, then states, but every now and then when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can see shapes in the shadows of my room, standing just out of focus, all facing the same corner, the one that's always darker than the rest. In the far reaches of West Texas, where the desert sprawls out like a faded bruise and the wind never stops whispering, there's a place called Terlingua. Folks who live around there don't talk much after dark, and if you stay long enough, you start to understand why. You hear things. You feel things. And sometimes when the moon is pale and full, you swear the land itself remembers. People say the sound of a train passes through Terlingua at midnight. That wouldn't be strange anywhere else, but the tracks were torn up more than 60 years ago. Rusted rails pulled and sold for scrap after the mines closed. Nothing's run through there since 1962. Still, the sound carries, low and metallic, echoing across the desert like a ghost dragging chains. I first heard about it from a man named Clay. He owned a weathered little gas station halfway between Study Butte and the Rio Grande, a sunburned place where even the tumbleweeds looked tired. I was traveling through taking photos for a series on abandoned towns, and Clay had the kind of leathery face that looked carved by the desert itself. He asked what I was doing out there, and when I told him, he squinted at me for a long time before saying, "You hear the crying train yet?" I laughed. Didn't know there was one. He didn't smile. "You will." He told me about the night runs, how around midnight, headlights cut through the sand like a knife, two pale beams floating just above the ground, no tracks beneath them. He said the sound starts soft like a hum, and then builds until the windows rattle even though nothing touches the earth. And then comes the crying, a long, drawn-out wail that sounds human. Some say it's the whistle, others say it's something else. I didn't believe him, not at first. But that night I camped out near the old right-of-way, just outside of town. The moon was sharp and white, and the air carried that dry metallic tang that smells like rain but never delivers. Around midnight I heard it. At first it was faint like the murmur of distant thunder, then it grew, a steady clattering rhythm that shouldn't have been there. My heart picked up. The sound came closer, echoing through the desert with impossible weight, and I saw the light, twin beams cutting through the night. I froze. They passed maybe 50 yards from my truck, gliding through the air where the rails once lay. I could see the outline of a freight engine, black and enormous, its wheels turning on nothing, its windows glowing with a dim orange light. And for a moment I thought I saw faces, men pressed to the glass, hollow-eyed, their mouths open in silent screams. The light vanished as quickly as it came. The sound faded, leaving only the hiss of the wind. But then I heard it, the crying. It was faint, almost human, a woman's voice, somewhere between a sob and a scream, drawn out into the desert until it dissolved. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I drove back to Clay's gas station. He was out front, sipping coffee from a tin mug. I told him what I saw, and he just nodded like he'd been waiting. "You see their faces?" he asked. I said I thought I did. "That means they saw you too." He told me about the crash. It happened in the spring of 1962, when the mines were closing and the railroad was dying. A freight train loaded with ore was coming up from the river bend, carrying a handful of miners heading home after the last shift. Something went wrong near Terlingua. Some say sabotage, others blame the wind. But the train jumped the tracks and went down into the arroyo. Everyone on board died, burned alive in the wreck. The company cleaned it up quick, hauled off what they could, and pulled the rails within weeks. But the land never forgot. Every year, around the date of the crash, the train comes back. "You'll hear it again," Clay said. "They always come back for the ones who listen." I thought he was trying to scare me. But a week later, after I'd finished shooting the mines and ghost towns, I couldn't stop thinking about that sound. I drove back out one last time, parked where I'd seen the lights before, and waited. Midnight came. The wind was cold and restless. Then I heard it again, the hum, the rattle, the grinding of phantom steel. But this time it was louder, closer. The headlights flared, bright enough to bleach the sand white. I saw the engine again, impossibly solid now, smoke rising from its stack, the number 3712 gleaming faintly beneath layers of soot. Through the windows I saw the faces again, but now I could hear them, muffled voices crying out. One of them looked right at me. A man in a miner's helmet, skin blackened and peeling, eyes like burned glass. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, and the air turned thick, heavy with heat and the stench of smoke. I stumbled backward as the engine screeched to a halt right in front of me, metal screaming on air. The door opened. A wave of heat rolled out, and I saw inside, rows of passengers, all burned, all staring. The conductor stood in the doorway, face melted into something unrecognizable. He held out his hand. I don't know why I took it. Maybe I couldn't help myself. The moment our fingers touched, the desert disappeared. I was standing inside the train. The walls pulsed with firelight, the floor slick with soot. The air was thick with ash and something that sounded like breathing. Every window showed fire outside, as if the whole desert was burning. The conductor led me down the aisle, past the passengers. Their eyes followed me, wide and hollow. At the far end of the car, a woman sat by herself, clutching something in her lap. When she looked up, I realized it was a child. Small, burned, lifeless. Tears streamed down her face, cutting clean paths through the soot. She looked at me and whispered, "He never stopped." Then everything went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. My truck was still there, the sand undisturbed. But there were footprints, charred, blackened prints leading away from where I'd been standing, fading into the desert. I drove out of Terlingua that day and never went back. But sometimes when I'm alone on a highway at night, I still hear it. That low metallic hum rising from nowhere, the distant wail of something that shouldn't be. And every time it happens, I look in the rearview mirror, because once I didn't. And that's when I saw the light coming up behind me, two pale beams cutting through the dark, moving fast, chasing me down the empty road. It followed me for miles until the sun came up and it faded away. Now I keep moving. I don't stop near tracks, not even old ones, because somewhere out there in the desert near Terlingua, the crying train still runs. And if you ever hear it calling, whatever you do, don't listen too long, because once they see you, they never stop coming. The stretch of Highway 79 that cuts through the eastern edge of Texas has always had a kind of quiet to it, a silence that feels too deliberate, too complete, like the world itself is holding its breath. At night, the road becomes something else entirely. The trees crowd closer, leaning in with gnarled branches that scrape at the wind, and the sky hangs low and swollen with clouds. You can drive for miles without seeing another pair of headlights or a single building. That's why when Mark and Jenny saw the glow of the gas station ahead, it felt like salvation. They'd been driving for 6 hours straight, and the gauge on the dashboard hovered just above empty. The sign rose out of the dark like a beacon, a tall, flickering neon shape that buzzed weakly against the night. It read Harper's Gas and Service, 24 hours. Below it, a row of pumps stood lined up beneath a weathered canopy, bathed in a sickly yellow light. The couple pulled in, gravel crunching under the tires, and the engine gave a tired cough before dying completely. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and something else, something metallic like rust or old blood. Jenny got out first, wrapping her jacket tighter against the cold. "Finally," she muttered, scanning the empty lot. The place looked like it had been forgotten by time. An old building with chipped paint, dusty windows, and a Coca-Cola sign so faded it was almost white. But the lights were on, and through the glass she could see shelves lined with snacks and motor oil. Mark grabbed the nozzle from one of the pumps, but there was no card reader, no digital screen, just an old mechanical counter. He frowned. "Guess we pay inside." Jenny nodded and walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled as she stepped in, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. The air inside smelled of dust and gasoline, and the faint hum of a refrigerator came from somewhere in the back. A man stood behind the counter, tall and thin, his face pale under the fluorescent light. He wore a gray uniform with a red patch that read Earl. "Evening," he said, voice dry as paper. "Hi," Jenny replied, forcing a smile. "We need to fill up. Pump number 2. The man nodded slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "You folks headed somewhere particular?" "Dallas," she said. "Visiting family." He tilted his head slightly as if trying to remember something. "Dallas. Ain't been there in a long time." His hand drifted to the register, fingers resting on the keys. "Gas'll be 37 cents a gallon." Jenny blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" 37 cents, he repeated. "Same as always." Mark came in, shaking his head. "None of the pumps work. I tried a couple. Nothing's coming out." Earl's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Don't you worry. You'll get what you need." He reached below the counter and pulled out a receipt pad, the paper yellowed with age. "You pay now, I'll take care of it." Jenny hesitated. Everything about the place felt off. The hum of the lights, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, even the way Earl stood perfectly still as though waiting for them to make a mistake. But she didn't want to argue. She handed him a 20. He slid it into the register with slow, deliberate movements, tore off a receipt and placed it in her hand. The paper was soft and brittle, and at the bottom the date read, August 4th, 1953. She stared at it, her skin prickling. "Is this some kind of joke?" Earl said nothing. They walked back to the car without speaking. The air outside felt thicker now, the lights overhead buzzing louder, flickering in irregular bursts. Mark popped the driver's door open, ready to leave. But when he looked at the gauge, his breath caught. The needle had moved, and it was full. He turned to Jenny. "Did you?" She shook her head. "No, it was empty a minute ago." Mark stepped out and walked around the car, looking at the ground. There were no puddles, no spills, no sign of fuel. The pumps stood silent, their hoses motionless. Then, as he turned back toward the building, he froze. The lights inside were gone. The entire station was dark. Jenny followed his gaze. The glowing sign above the canopy flickered once, twice, and then vanished. The building was nothing but a black shape against the trees. "Get in the car," she whispered. They drove, tires spitting gravel, the rearview mirror catching nothing but the empty stretch of road behind them. After a mile, Jenny looked down at the receipt again. The ink had begun to fade, the numbers dissolving into the paper as if sinking into it. By the time they reached the highway's next intersection, the paper was blank. The next day, they stopped at a diner on the edge of a small town. The waitress poured them coffee and asked where they were coming from. "Somewhere outside of Livingston," Mark said. "We stopped at this gas station, Harper's, I think. Out on Highway 79, ever heard of it?" The waitress froze. Her hand hovered over the pot for a second too long, before she set it down. "You sure about that name?" "Yeah," Jenny said. "Harper's Gas and Service." Big old sign. Looked like it had been there forever. The woman's mouth tightened. "It has. Burned down in '53. Lightning hit the pumps, set the whole place off. Killed a man named Earl Harper. Folks around here say sometimes people still see it late at night, always when they're running low." Jenny and Mark exchanged a look. The waitress continued, lowering her voice. "My daddy told me once that if you stop there, you'll make it to where you're going. But you'll never take that road again." They tried to laugh about it later, calling it a weird coincidence, a trick of exhaustion. But a week after they got back home, Mark started having dreams. He'd wake up in the middle of the night smelling gasoline and smoke, his hands trembling. Jenny said she could hear the bell from the station's door sometimes, faint and distant, like it was ringing just down the hall. One evening, when she went to get into the car, she found another receipt on the passenger seat. Yellow paper, brittle edges. No date this time. Just 2 words written in that same fading ink: "Next time." The sky over West Texas had that washed-out look it gets in late September, pale and enormous. A sun-bleached canvas stretching from one end of the world to the other. The land beneath it was flat, red and endless, a place where silence wasn't the absence of sound but a constant low hum of wind over stone. It was there that 5 hikers, city folks from Austin with borrowed gear and borrowed confidence, took a trail that didn't exist on any map they owned. They followed an old oil road half swallowed by sand and time. The kind of road that made you feel like you were trespassing in a place that didn't want you. The group was led by a man named Clay Benton, who had grown up around Midland before moving east. He knew the area better than the rest and had the kind of restless curiosity that didn't always pair well with common sense. Behind him walked his girlfriend, Naomi, a photographer who saw beauty in ruin. Then there was Aaron, quiet and wiry, the sort of man who carried more water than anyone else and talked less than he should. Sarah, who'd recently quit her job in Dallas, and Matt, her cousin, made up the rest. They were looking for something, a ruin, a ghost town, a place to feel small and alive again. What they found was none of that. They'd been walking for hours when they noticed the shift in the wind. The air, once dry and sharp, grew heavy with grit. Dust lifted in thin veils across the horizon, curling in lazy columns that shimmered under the sun. Clay stopped, one hand shading his eyes, and said he didn't like how fast the wind was changing. There was no storm in the forecast, Naomi reminded him. But even as she said it, she tasted dirt on her tongue. By the time they spotted the storm shelter, the sky had turned the color of old brass. It was half buried in the sand, a concrete structure jutting out of the desert like a bunker, with a rusted metal door that hung slightly ajar. A faded sign beside it read County Emergency Shelter Number 3, the paint nearly gone. Clay said it must have been left from the 60s, one of those Cold War relics meant to keep people safe from everything except time. The wind picked up again and the horizon darkened. It was coming, a dust storm, fast and angry. They didn't have a choice. Clay pushed the door open and they went inside. The air in the shelter was stale, thick with the smell of rust and something older. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, long dead. The floor was covered in a fine layer of dust that seemed to shift with each breath they took. The wind outside roared, shaking the door against its hinges. But what caught Naomi's attention was the sound beneath it. Something like whispering. She thought it was the wind forcing its way through cracks, but then she realized the whispers had cadence, rhythm, words she couldn't quite make out. Aaron clicked on his flashlight. The beam swept across the small room, rows of benches, a broken radio, a half-collapsed storage cabinet. On the far wall, a window-sized square was sealed behind thick glass like an observation chamber. Behind that glass, impossibly, the storm raged. Dust whirled and churned in a confined space, forming spirals that pressed against the barrier as if trying to escape. Lightning flashed within it, dry, silent bursts that illuminated faces forming and dissolving in the dust. "Is that real?" Matt asked, his voice barely a whisper. No one answered. The wind outside faded, but the one inside did not. The storm behind the glass seemed alive, breathing. The whispers grew louder. This time they carried names. Clay heard one, Aaron, clear as day, spoken in a dry, rasping voice. He turned toward Aaron, but the other man was pale and shaking, staring at the storm. "It said my name," Aaron whispered. Then it said Sarah's, then Naomi's. Clay tried to laugh it off, told them it was some kind of weird echo, but he didn't sound convinced. He walked closer to the glass. The dust inside seemed to shift toward him. Faces pressed against the inner surface, hollow-eyed, mouths open in silent screams. He stumbled back, his heart hammering. "There are people in there," he said. Aaron lifted the flashlight again and caught something scrawled on the concrete near the base of the glass. "They're still talking." Beneath it, a date from 1972. Sarah asked what it meant, but no one knew. Clay touched the mark anyway, and when he did, the storm behind the glass flared bright white. The sound hit them all at once, and a chorus of voices, thousands maybe, whispering over one another in a deafening rush. The door behind them slammed shut. Naomi screamed. The whispers became words again, clearer now. They spoke of the wind that never stops, the ones who walked into it and never came back. Clay tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew hotter, heavier. The light from Aaron's flashlight flickered and died. When it came back, Sarah was gone. They searched for her, calling her name, their voices echoing in the small space, but the only answer came from the glass. Sarah's face was there, clear as day, her hair whipping in the swirling dust. She was mouthing something they couldn't hear, pressing her hands against the inside as if begging to be let out. Naomi ran toward the window, but the moment she touched it, Sarah's face disintegrated, swept away in the storm. Matt started shouting that it wasn't real, that it was all some hallucination, a trick of carbon monoxide or dehydration. He pounded on the door until his knuckles split, but when he turned back, Clay was gone too. Naomi saw the storm pulse again, and there was Clay, his mouth open in a silent scream inside the swirling dust. The storm whispered his name over and over. Aaron and Naomi were the last. The whispers turned to screams, a violent chorus that rattled the walls. The glass began to crack. Aaron tried to pull Naomi toward the door, but she stood frozen, her eyes locked on something behind the storm. For just a moment, she saw herself in there too, pale and wide-eyed, watching from the other side. The glass shattered. What came through wasn't wind, not exactly. It was dust, alive and endless, filling their lungs, their eyes, their ears. It poured into their mouths until they couldn't scream anymore. The shelter shook once, then went still. When the sun rose the next morning, the desert was silent again. The storm had passed. The door to the shelter creaked open, just enough for a thin ribbon of dust to slip out and scatter on the wind. Weeks later, when the search team found the shelter, they said it was empty. Just 5 sets of footprints leading inside and none coming out. The glass wall was whole again, the dust behind it swirling slow and quiet, whispering names. New ones this time. Names the desert hadn't learned yet. The first time I saw the light go wrong at the house on Onion Creek Road, I thought it was just heat haze or some trick in my windshield. The sky over Jefferson was clear and high, the color of a cheap bottle, and the moon was standing up there swollen and smug as a dinner plate. I had the wrecker idling on the shoulder where the asphalt crumbled into broom sedge, waiting to pull a deer-struck Camry out of a ditch, when the plantation house at the end of the dirt spur seemed to lean in the air like a man rising out of a recliner. The moonlight hit it and then didn't, as if the clapboard and pillars were not there or were taking the light and drinking it down. The pines around it wore a silver outline. The house did not. It was a hole punched out of the night. The longer I looked, the more the light seemed to curl away from it, like a dog riding the arc around a mean man's boot. The locals call it Whitlow Place. Though the last Whitlow died sometime after the war that wasn't civil to begin with. The foundation is brick, the kind you find soft and orange under your fingernail with a wraparound porch and a widow's walk that pokes up at the sky like a warning finger. It sits on a bluff above the creek where the water slips past with a fat, slow sound. There's privet choking the fence line and cypress knees coming up like knuckles where the ground stays damp. Because East Texas is like that, wet even when it's not raining, humid in ways that get under your shirt. You can smell the lake from there if the wind's right. That funky green scent Caddo throws off, cattails and boat fuel and a sweetness like rotting melons. People used to drink out there. If you talk to the sheriff, he'll say they still do. Empty bottles, condom wrappers, the usual reminders of youth and boredom. I used to go out there in high school with a girl named Madison, not because I wanted to be scared, but because that was where she wanted to park. It had the kind of darkness teenagers think is romantic. She would say things like it was so dark it made her want to whisper. I remember trying to tell her how a whisper made no sense in that place, because the dark there didn't respect a whisper. It didn't respect anything. It just pressed in until you felt your pulse knock against your ribs and wished for the neon open sign at the Donut Palace on Highway 59, the one that was always flickering because flicker still meant light. Years later, I was towing for Marshall Motor and passing between calls on one of those nights where every drunk in 2 counties went shopping for oak trees with their bumpers. I had the radio turned to a preacher broadcast out of Shreveport, and the preacher was working himself up on sin. His words going hard as hailstones when I caught the line of the Whitlow place off to my left and watched the moonlight go around it. An easy curve like a boat pushing wake around a cypress trunk. The preacher said some doors should not be opened. He meant the heart's door. I thought of the front door out there with the center glass pane you could barely see, because it was filmed with age and dust and nests. That door hadn't opened for anyone in a long time. Folks said people went inside and came out wrong. Pale like chalk, that's how they said it. And that detail felt as stale as an old newspaper clipping until you saw Kent Willis. He worked bait and gas at the dock in Uncertain. He and his brother took a dare to step in on a Sunday when the moon was high and the light bent wrong. They went in with old mag lights and came out 4 hours later without their lights, without a scratch on them, but with faces that looked like carved basswood. You can picture a man whose sun has been rubbed off him. You don't think it's possible until you see his lips all one color with his cheeks. Dusty white, his eyes set like chips of obsidian in snow. I stood behind him in line once and watched him hold his breath in these little measured sips while he waited to pay for some sunflower seeds. I remember how the cashier set the coins on the counter instead of laying them in his palm. That was 3 summers back. 2 months after that, Kent's brother put a .22 in his mouth. The sheriff's office won't say that was the house, but the rest of us don't have to pretend. That fall, my sister's boy disappeared for 2 nights. 13 years old, last seen near Caddo, the kind of missing that starts families praying in parking lots. We found him on Onion Creek Road at dawn, barefoot, shirtless, sitting in the ditch where the ragweed had bent around him like he was a fence post. The dew had iced his hair, and when I touched his shoulder, his skin was cool like an apple left in the refrigerator. He looked at me with that wide Friday night fear, the kind you see in deer, and said very softly that he had stepped inside the house and the dark had hissed in his ear. He didn't say what the hiss had said. He never did. I tell you these bits because this isn't an urban legend drawn up after midnight by grown men who do not want to go home. The house is there, the light goes wrong there, and inside it is black in a way that makes the hairs on your chest go tight. You can see it for yourself. Wait for the full moon. Drive out from Marshall past the Jack-in-the-Box churches with their letterboard verses that never change. Past the billboard that says God is watching, and then a mile later the one that says girls, 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 even though there are none. Past the rusted machinery dying in fields around Karnak. Into the pine curtain where the trees are so tall they could hatch the stars. Turn left onto Onion Creek Road where the asphalt breaks into dust and crushed shells from some ancient load. Park where the road dead ends at the county sign. The house is another 100 yards on a private strip. You are trespassing already by the time you can smell the old swamp silt. Watch the moonlight tip the tops of the pine and then watch it bend, as if someone set a glass dome over the house and the light slid around that dome. Step closer if you have the nerve. Feel the air cool. Hear the crickets go thin. Your breath will make a small show in front of your face even in July because the black inside the house breathes cold. Reach your hand toward the porch and note how your skin disappears a little too early. Swallowed to the wrist before it should, like your arm is going behind slick theater glass. The night I went in, I did it because I was tired of thinking about it. If a thing lives on attention, then the house had grown fat on ours. A crew from Austin had parked their van out there to shoot a documentary, and their van battery died, and they said something had filmed them back through their own lens. The preacher on the radio weighed in about demons. The physics teacher at the high school cracked jokes about albedo over coffee with the sheriff. Mothers added another place to the list of where their kids were not supposed to go. There was always some talk about selling the land or tearing the thing down, but every county official who looked into it said the same polite version of not worth the trouble. It's odd what people will not touch. You can shoot a coyote and hang it from a fence post without a shrug in Harrison County, but you leave that house alone. I parked the wrecker in a pullout and left it idling with the hazard lights on. Red blink and pause, red blink and pause, regretting it as soon as I took the key because that heartbeat was a comfort. I walked past the county sign and felt the difference in the air as soon as the gravel gave way to dirt. My headlights swung long bars across the trunks, then caught the house and slipped right off it, vanished like rain on hot concrete. I clicked the lights off and the moon took over. The trees and the graphite brightness of the creek and the pale crown of my breath all took their share. The house did not. The porch was not illuminated so much as outlined by a willingness of the eye to draw lines where there were none. The steps rose into a plank of dark. The front door was a rectangle cut in night. I had a flashlight on a belt clip, and I left it there because anyone can shine light at a thing. What I wanted was to see if I could meet the dark on its own terms. The floorboards flexed and then didn't. That was the first wrong sensation inside. You felt the give under your boots. You heard the nails squeal, and then at the same time you didn't, as if the house were a small denial of physics. My hands lost their shape at the wrist. I lifted them and they came back to me only when I pulled them against my chest. The air smelled like the inside of a paper bag and something sweet like old lard. It was not empty in there. There was furniture because I bumped my thigh against a table edge and the sting lifted my heart into my throat. There were probably paintings because from one wall came that flat emanation of presence. The sensation of a surface hanging over you with a gaze you cannot quite meet. I heard mice, but their scurry fell away the way sound falls away on a stage. The moonlight should have been coming through somewhere, scanning in across a floor catching dust. It wasn't, my eyes were working. I knew because I could make out the faint line of the doorway behind me. I could see the square of the window ahead as a darker dark. If you have ever closed your eyes in a lit room and stared at the red behind your eyelids, that is a color compared to what was here. I had been holding my breath. I let a little go, and that was when I felt the room inhale it like a hand on my chest. I took another breath, and the air was not air as I know it. That sentence looks dramatic written down, but there is no drama in a body realizing it must work to separate what it needs from what it is being given. The black was a medium. It wasn't smoke and it wasn't vapor. It was more like the air had been taken below freezing and then botched back to liquid. My breath came back to me smaller and colder, and I understood in a low, practical way that I could not stay inside very long without a cost. I took one step forward and felt the skin of my face wrinkle from the cold. Something brushed my ear. It was a moth. That was my instant lie to myself. A moth come to sample salt. A moth that made no sound at all when its wing touched me and left a dampness behind like it had licked me. I put my palm to my ear and my palm was a blank. A missing person on my own body. I spoke then. I said, "I'm here." It felt stupid and courageous in equal measure. What came back was not echo. Echo you can predict and ride, like catching your reflection in a storefront window and making a face to startle your own face. This came back soft as a boy leaning in to tell you what he stole from his mama's purse. The voice did not come from any one place. It spoke in the shape of the room, the way some churches sing even when the hymn is poorly done. It said, "There you are," and it was not a greeting. It was the satisfaction of a fisherman saying, "There you are," when the line goes taut. I took a second step and my shoulder found a door frame. I felt the jam under my fingertips, the paint thick and gummy the way it gets after generations have stood there and worried about what to say. I pressed my face close to it and the wood flashed into existence because I was that near, and the reality of it was a relief. The house was a house at least sometimes, and the laws of it still worked at the edges. The voice said, "I have a place for you." The word place came with a temperature drop, as if to have a place was to go down into earth. I remembered my nephew in the ditch. I saw the squirrel track mark of dried mud on his cheek, and the way his pupils swallowed the color of his eyes. He had said the dark hissed to him and sneered when he brought light up to meet it. He had said the light slid off like something ashamed of itself. He had said he tasted pennies and a cold coin hid under his tongue for 3 days. He had not told me what the voice said. He did not say place. The house changed around me the way a man shifts his weight in a chair so you are sitting nearer his lap than before. The black went deeper. There is a black which opens like a door to a field at night. This wasn't that. This was a black that suggests down when you are on a level floor. I braced myself because my knees told me they would fold if I did not. The tide of it came in slow. It came up to my hips and in through the seams of my clothes. It settled into my hair. My teeth ached as if I had bitten foil. I took a third step because I am stubborn when I should be careful. The voice said, "Look at you." It sounded admiring and also sarcastic, like the way an older cousin says nice shoes when he means nice shoes for a fool. I do not believe in devils. That is a statement born not of logic but of a hot little terror, that if I acknowledge them, they will want acknowledgement every day. I believe in places. There are places where people drown in inches of water, and places where a right turn takes you into a month you do not want. My boyhood home in San Augustine had a back hall where the tile was always cold, no matter the weather, and sometimes the lights wouldn't come on unless you whistled. That's not a ghost. That's a place that has gotten used to its own weather. The Whitlow place is a place that has achieved the full arrogance of itself. It has learned to bend what should not bend. It took moonlight, which is not a thing a man ever has to think about, and taught it to flow like oil around its eaves. It took the air inside it and made it a clutch rather than a gift. Do not tell me that is physics. If a physicist wants to come out there with a notebook and say the word singularity in a voice like a prayer, I will listen. All I know is the black drew itself into my mouth and nose and eyes, and in each of those places it described itself with a taste, a smell, a pressure. It tasted like a penny that had been kept under a mattress. It smelled like wet limestone. It pressed like a man's hand who loves you but has had a bad day. I took out my flashlight then, pride set aside. I clicked it and nothing happened. I slapped the heel of my palm against it and nothing happened. The battery was new. The bulb was good. It was the same flashlight that could find a lost license plate at the bottom of a culvert. It was no longer a flashlight inside this place. It was a tube of silence. I put it back and said I should go. It is a mark of a certain kind of male stupidity that I said it in a polite voice, as if I had crumpled a napkin at a friend's dinner and wanted to be invited back. The floor moved. That is the honest truth of the next sensation. The floor moved like a tongue tasting a spoon. The plank under my left heel raised just enough to lift my weight and then went down, daring me to put my weight back where it had been. I did. I went backward 1 step. The house let me do that. The voice said that way, and it was less an invitation than a fact pointed out. I backed into the shapes I had passed. My shoulder met the door jamb again. I found the line of the doorway and reached the porch, gasping in a pinched, quiet way that shamed me. When the night air hit me, it was glorious, and yet it did not quite wash the black away. The black did not want to be washed away. It came with me a step, then loosened and sank back with a sulking firmness. I stood with my boots on the bottom step and felt my heartbeat slow down from the flurry of a trapped bird to the drumming pace of a man who knows where his truck is. The moon threw lines across the yard. The road back to the county sign had become very lovely in its poverty. The little flowers, the dew on the morning glory leaves, the shimmer of the creek beyond the dark line of the house, everything visible again. I stood too long, maybe 10 minutes, just letting my eyes congratulate themselves for their work. Then the house sighed. The sound went very deep in the wood. It was that sound an old porch makes in August when nobody is walking on it. It was patient. It was not the sigh of exhaustion. It was the sigh a fisherman makes when he lets a fish run line rather than yank and snap it. You expect me to say I was found 2 days later in a ditch. I was not. I walked back to my wrecker and sat in the driver's seat and put my forehead on the wheel. I drove home and washed my face in the sink and watched the black water that wasn't black slide down into the drain. I went to bed and slept 6 hours and woke with the taste of the penny behind my molars. 6 hours is not enough sleep for a man who went into that house. It was more than I should have gotten. I made coffee. My hands did not shake. I poured milk into the mug and the milk went gray, and I dumped it out and stood looking at the sink. Outside, the day stood in the doorway, a normal white day. I stayed inside for a week. I went to work because you cannot tell your boss you met a place and now every fluorescent tube hurts your teeth. I used the truck as a shield. I watched people's faces. Most faces looked ordinary. A few did not. A few wore a thin dusting, a pallor that was not illness, like someone had taken an eraser to the blush and freckle and tone of them. I thought of Kent at the dock and the cashier leaving coins on the counter. I thought of my nephew sitting so still, like a man who has learned something about the world that must be carried with care. The second week I woke at 3 a.m. with the certainty of a man who hears his name spoken as he falls asleep. There was light on my bedroom wall. It was a square, bigger than a window should make, and it was moving. The square had edges and then it didn't, the way the house did. The moon was full again. I stood and went to the window, my breath making a small veil on the glass. The light did not come from outside in. It came from my wall out. The square rotated as if on a lazy Susan. It went from a square to a rectangle to a thin lozenge and then to something round. It lifted off the wall like a coin picked up by a magnet. It hung in the air. I could see the dust in the room. I could not see the light on the dust. It was as if the dust refused to be noticed in the presence of that geometry. I was not surprised. That should worry you more than anything I have written. Surprise is a healthy reflex. I had been inoculated against it out there at the Whitlow place when I stood with one foot in the house's mouth and felt that cold breath draw from my own lungs. I held still. The square that wasn't square moved over my dresser and my boots by the door, and the framed photo of my sister and her boy at Caddo. When it passed over the photo, the boy's eyes went empty for an instant and then came back. That was when I said no. That was when I picked up a belt and won the first truly foolish prize of my life, by snapping leather at a thing that does not care about leather. The light bent around my belt and then reached for my hand the way water reaches into a glove if you plunge it in wrong. It touched the skin and my skin did not like it. My skin moved away from my bones. The light withdrew with the slow patience of the house's sigh. I tell you that to tell you this last part. The house eats the moonlight. It keeps it. When you go inside, the house gives you a taste of what it keeps. Not enough to feed you, just enough to remind you that you are a thing that needs to be fed. When you come out, the house sends a portion back with you. It is very small. It is enough. You carry it home like a gentleman carries a woman's perfume on his cuff without knowing it. You breathe and the house breathes too. Far away, and the line between your breath and its black medium gets shorter. It learned this trick in the years after everyone stopped bothering it. It learned to go visiting. It learned to ride the geometry of light that falls through the night and under doors and into sleeping mouths. It learned to send its cold ahead like an introduction. It does not have a name because it does not need one. It has a place because that is what it is. And when it finds someone whose place inside them is too big, too empty, too freshly swept, it goes in and sets the furniture just so. If you are waiting for me to be found in a ditch or on a hospital bed or in a parish hall with my hands folded, I will disappoint you again. I still tow wrecks on 59 and I still stop for coffee at the place in Avenger where they burn the bacon. My sister's boy does not go out at night. He sits at the kitchen table and sharpens pencils as if he is disciplining a small army. Kent at the dock is paler than ever, and the cashier still sets coins down for him. The documentary kids did not return. The sheriff says one of them called his mother and wept. And for the sheriff, that is enough in the way of evidence. The preacher is out there on Sunday mornings with a congregation that nods when he says sin and sleeps when he says mercy. On full moons, if I am not careful, the square on my wall returns and reminds me of its perfect edges. If I am careful, it does not need to come. The carefulness is the problem. The carefulness is how it learns the house of me. Do not go out to Onion Creek Road when the moon is a white coin in the slot of the sky. Do not use your headlights to draw a new outline on the dark that lives there. Do not reach your hand into it as if you are testing bathwater. If you have already been, then you already know I am not warning you to keep away. I am warning you to keep it fed. Light bends around it for a reason. That reason is appetite. It is a hunger old as brick. Appetites do not vanish. They go out walking. They find their way back by the breath you give them. I can feel mine in the morning sometimes, quiet as cold smoke tilting toward the window, where the moon will hang tonight, over the lake with its gumbo smell and its ghostly boats and its men who swear they do not believe in anything, until the moment when the light turns sideways and begins to go obligingly around. The wind had a way of talking to you on that stretch of Route 66, a dry whisper that found its way through the seams of the truck and into your head. Caleb kept both hands tight on the wheel as the flat land unrolled like a sheet of old paper, all faded creases and sunburned edges. He had been driving since Amarillo, though the day already felt much older than it should have. The sky was a pale tin lid pressed down over everything, and heat rose from the asphalt in soft waves that made distant things look untrustworthy. He passed the leaning water tower near Groom, a brush fire scar that cut black along a fence line, a cattle gate chained shut and draped with torn grocery bags that snapped in the wind like weak flags. The road was 2 lanes of worn promise and old grief, the sort of road where your thoughts could start walking ahead of you and turn around with a look you did not like. The gas light had come on 20 miles back, and he had told himself it was fine. He watched the needle crouch lower anyway. There had been a time he took pride in outsmarting distances, planning his stops, knowing where the pumps were likely to be lit, and where the coffee would not taste like a scorched ashtray. But 2 years of shuffling jobs and the last 6 months in a sideline repairing highway signs for a subcontractor who paid late had worn down good habits. He had a laminated badge with a company name that had already changed twice, a toolbox rattling behind the seat, and a plastic grocery sack of leftover screws and washers that chimed faintly whenever he hit a seam in the road. He had a small cardboard box belted into the passenger seat, taped neatly, and the words from Mom's attorney still shivering through him even though the funeral had been last week. Personal effects from storage. You were listed as next of kin. There is a key in the envelope. Please sign. Caleb signaled without thinking, though there was no one to see. Eased into the shoulder when the engine cough sounded a little too much like a final word, and let the truck glide as far as it was willing. The world slowed. He saw it then, an unexpected little slice of time that looked stranded just off the highway. A diner, the old kind with the rounded corners, stainless steel skin dulled by years of sun and grit until it looked like pewter. The sign on the roof said last stop in block letters that had bled red down their seams. The parking lot was mostly a scabbed field of gravel with a few stubborn weeds. It all looked empty enough to be a photograph until the door swung, and he thought he saw movement inside. He coasted in and the truck died in a tremor. The quiet that followed was thick and not friendly. He sat for one heartbeat, too, and told himself he was grateful the world had given him anything at all. When he opened the door, the heat climbed into the cab like a stray dog, and the wind brought the smell of creosote, old oil, and something that made him think of rain that never actually came. The windows of the diner reflected the whole scene back at him with the brightness turned down, the kind of reflection you get from old glass. For a second he thought he saw a figure in the reflection moving behind him, a thin woman in a summer dress with her hair tied back, but when he turned, there was no one in the lot. Heat made its own people. Inside it was cooler. A tired air conditioner rattled in the wall and pushed out air that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and older smoke. The floor was checkerboard tile gone dull gray in the white squares. Red vinyl booth stitched with repairs and a long counter that had taken a lot of elbows and secrets. The jukebox in the corner was the old kind too. Chrome like a toaster with a slanted front where you could imagine a man in a suit sliding in a coin with a cigarette balanced on his lip. It was already playing before he realized there was music. A thin voice coming through the wobble of a record that had been loved hard. I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. He remembered that song from his grandmother's house, the one she played in winter when she sat in the window and watched for snow that never came. A woman behind the counter looked up. She had a smile ready that seemed brave and tired at the same time. Her hair was dark and piled up with silver pins that caught the light. The name tag said Mabel in red script that looked hand-painted. She set down a coffee pot and motioned to the stools. You look like you could use something warm, she said. Or just something. Caleb touched his cap in a reflex that belonged to his better, younger self and took a stool. The cushion sighed under him. The box on the passenger seat had impressed itself against his mind even here, the same way the smell of a house lingers on your clothes long after you think you have left. He cleared his throat and asked if the pumps were working anywhere nearby. Mabel nodded like she had been asked that question 1,000 times and poured coffee into a mug that had a chip half as wide as his thumb. Out back, she said. Single pump, cash only, after you eat. Things in the world go smoother when you do it in order. He smiled despite the dryness in his mouth. I can pay first if it keeps things orderly. She waved him off and slid a laminated menu toward him that had probably been made when people still trusted plastic to last forever. Patty melt, chicken fried steak, slice of pie. The jukebox drifted into the second verse, the piano walking like it had learned to be careful on slick floors. He ordered the patty melt without looking too closely. The coffee was hot and honestly good. Mabel's hands moved with a rhythm that made him think she had been doing this since before he had been born. He liked people who knew their jobs even if the world had forgotten to pay them for it. While she took the order to the pass-through window, he looked toward the diner's long front windows. They were the kind of windows that did not quite line up square with the world anymore. The angle made the reflection of the booths look like they continued a few inches into a place that did not quite exist. In the glass, he saw himself sitting at the counter, broad shoulders hunched a little, the faded company logo on his shirt, the sunburn that had lifted across the bridge of his nose. He saw Mabel in motion, the outline of a cook back there with a towel over his shoulder that never seemed to come into focus. And he saw someone in the last booth by the door, a boy with hair too long to be neat and too short to be wild, wearing a t-shirt from a water park that had closed decades ago. The boy sat sideways, watching him in the reflection, and lifted a hand slowly as if he were underwater, and the gesture cost him. Caleb's heart made a small animal movement in his chest. He did not turn to look at the booth itself. He looked only at the glass. The boy's face came 3/4 into focus, and it became much harder to breathe. Lake Meredith flashed through Caleb's head like a photograph someone had kept in a wallet for too long, the colors off, the edges frayed. He had been 17. The boy in the window had been 12. Gage, who had trusted him to know which parts of Texas water would swallow you if you stopped kicking. The summer had been relentless, their father still alive and grinding down the days with beer and work, their mother not yet a shadow, the truck still running without the tap dance of prayer and curse it would require later. He had told Gage to hold the rope, step easy along the rocks to where the old boat ramp disappeared, laugh when the cart bumped his ankles. He had looked back when his name was called from the cooler, and when he faced forward again, the rope was between Gage's hands and the slick. Limestone had reached out and taken him smooth as if someone had pulled a plug. Caleb had gone into the water with his shoes on and his heart banging so hard he thought it would break ribs. But panic is a fish with knives, and it sliced his breath away until he could only claw at algae and light. A man they did not know had dragged both of them back and laid them on the baking ramp. Gage coughed once and the sound was wrong. It had taken the ambulance forever to find them. And then afterward, people had spoken too softly for weeks. The boy in the glass pushed his hair back and smiled in the shy way Gage always had when he did not want you to see he was proud of something. Caleb set the coffee down too hard. Mabel's eyes tracked the movement, but she did not come closer. The spoon on the saucer vibrated. The song swung around again to the chorus, the record finding its groove as if it had been trained to. "I'll be seeing you." The boy in the glass leaned forward as if to say something and then moved his lips. The sound that came through the diner was the scrape of the kitchen door and the soft clank of plates. The boy's words were not for hearing. They were for remembering. Caleb realized his hands had gone cold even in the heat. He told himself it was exhaustion, and the way grief will take the guardrails down from the usual roads of your mind. He told himself that if he turned to look, there would be no one in that last booth, only cracked red vinyl and a salt shaker that had fused to the surface. He kept his eyes on the counter and the small pool of coffee he had spilled. He willed his face into something ordinary. Mabel brought the patty melt and set it down in front of him. The smell was so exactly right that for a second he was standing in his mother's kitchen on a night when his father was away hauling pipe, and the radio was tuned to a station out of Oklahoma City. The kind of night when all you had to do was stay awake and count the freights that moaned their way into and out of town. Mabel said nothing, which was kindness. He ate. The onions were sweet, the bread fried to the edge of something that belonged in memory more than in the world. He drank water. The jukebox played the other verse again, and the sound wavered, and the hair on his arms prickled like he had walked through a patch of static. When he looked up, the window showed a different person in that last booth. A woman this time. Not young. Early 40s maybe. The kind of face that knows where to hide fear. She had a bandage above her left eyebrow, a delicate slash of white. He knew her, though he only saw her that once and only for an instant on a winter night outside Elk City. He had been driving home from a mercy shift on a crew he should not have worked. A man short and bitter and half sick. He had looked at his phone at a red light that had lasted too long. A text about a parts delivery and how much it would cost, and whether they could stretch to Friday. The green had come and the truck behind him had tapped his bumper and his foot had found the gas and the world had moved forward into a place where the air was bruised. The woman had been standing with another woman in a median that was too narrow for two people. They had been arguing. He could see that, the tightness in the shoulders, the slashed gestures. The woman with the bandage had stepped forward as if she had decided to leave the fight where it stood. Caleb had looked down for a second to tuck the phone onto the seat. When he looked up, she was closer to the lane than anyone had a right to be. He remembered hands, his own, trying to spin the wheel over the frost, the way tires can slide on a line of painted road like a girl thinks she can walk a balance beam forever. He had not hit her. Not really, he had told himself. The bumper had glanced and she had gone backwards in a twist of limbs. She had stood after, yes, she had stood. He had rolled the window down and asked if she was all right, and she had said yes in a voice that made him think of paper tearing. He had driven on, shaking so hard he had to hold the wheel with his forearms. She was fine, he told himself, for months. Then the letter had come from an insurance office, then a phone call, then nothing. His mind had filed her name in the drawer where things were not exactly wrong and not exactly right. She sat now in the glass with her hands folded like someone at church. Her eyes found him and he felt a draft in the room, though the air conditioner had cut off minutes ago. She did not speak either. It was not that kind of place. He pushed the plate away with a careful hand. His appetite had become a thing he did not want to meet. "How much for the gas?" he asked. And his own voice sounded like it had driven all night. Mabel set a small saucer on the counter with a key, the old kind with a thick oval tag that made the number look like it had been stamped with a hammer. "You finish your pie and I will turn the pump on," she said. "I did not order pie." "You did," she said, and pushed a plate toward him. Peckin, glistening like the top of a lake in early morning. For a second he saw his mother's hands again. The way she tapped the edges of the crust to make them neat. He closed his eyes. The boy in the window leaned closer, just a blur at the edge of his eyelids. He ate a bite and it was like falling out of a memory and landing hard in another one. He swallowed and set the fork down. "What is this place?" he said, and the words were flat. Mabel tilted her head. "A diner," she said. "It is the last stop if you think it is." "The song," he said, and he could hear how odd he sounded. A man chasing a string that had already burned his fingers. "Why does it only play that song?" She looked toward the jukebox as if she had been waiting for someone to ask that question in a way that could be survived. "The world leaves you with some things and it takes the others," she said. "It is not my business to know why it keeps this one. People like to hear it. They say it makes them think of times when goodbyes were promised to be gentle. Those promises do not always hold." Outside, the wind nosed at the door and set the bell to a nervous ringing. The windows leaned into their reflections and made more of themselves. For a moment, Caleb thought he saw a whole party in the glass. Tables full, faces turned toward the highway as if they were waiting for a parade that would never come. He saw his father sitting with his elbows out, shoulders making a roof for the boy who had not yet learned to be afraid of water. He saw the woman from the median, and the man who had dragged him up at Lake Meredith, and a second-grade teacher who had sent him out into the hall for laughing at the wrong moment. He saw a dog that had died under the porch on a winter morning when the ground was so hard the shovel bounced from it, and his father had sworn into his palms. He saw the bill for the hospital that had come the week before his mother's last day, and the smile of the nurse who had brought him coffee at 5 in the morning when the sky was gray and mean. None of those were in the room. They were on the far side of the glass where you could mistake a memory for a person if you were not careful. He took the key. The tag was warm as if it had been in a pocket. Mabel was already moving back toward the register where the switch likely was for the pump. He slid off the stool and kept his eyes on the counter and not the window, because he had learned by now that there were some things you could not unsee once you had let them in. At the door he stopped anyway, a reflex people have that lifts their head at the moment they say they will not look back. The song had reached the line where the voice promises to see you in the morning sun. In the glass nearest the door, he saw himself standing with his hand on the handle. Behind him in the reflection at the second booth sat a woman he had not seen since he was 19 and mean with it. A summer heartbreak who had left with a boy who could afford Austin. She looked the same and she caught his eyes with a tiny nod full of something like forgiveness. He opened the door and the wind hit him hard. The pump was one of those old cast-iron numbers with chipped paint and a glass globe at the top. The kind of thing people in cities put on porches as decoration, without ever knowing what it had had to do for a living. He slid the nozzle into the tank and stood with his back to the diner. He thought about nothing. He let the wind say the things it said to everyone. When the tank was full, he returned the nozzle and stood there listening to the tick of cooling parts. He looked up without meaning to, and the diner's windows caught him again. For a second, he saw nothing but the sky and his own outline. Then the room inside blinked into shape and every booth was filled. Every person he had wronged. Every omission he had let slip by because none of the days had seemed important enough to be careful with. Every kindness he had reached for and not completed. They were all there watching him. Some smiled. Some waited with tilted heads as if they were still deciding what to say. Gage lifted both hands and pressed them to the glass from the inside, and for a second it looked like he was leaving. Prince Caleb went back in because he had to pay and because he did not know what else would keep the day from coming apart. He set cash on the counter with too much in it and told her to keep the change. She said something about pie and he nodded and thanked her in a voice that felt borrowed. Her eyes were kind and tired and she did not look over his shoulder. He found himself wanting to apologize to her for some reason he could not name. He wanted to tell her he was sorry for the years that carved themselves into a person while they were busy doing the work that kept the lights on for others. At the door, Mabel said his name and he turned. He had not told her his name. "There are miles to go," she said softly, and something in her tone made the words different from how he had heard them in poems. He nodded. He touched the brim of his cap again and stepped into the heat. The truck started on the second try. He backed out and the gravel crunched like dry bones. He pulled onto the road and the wind arranged the dust behind him. He kept his eyes ahead where the line down the middle was cracked and resealed in patches that looked like someone had tried to stitch the state back together. In his rear view, the diner was a small metal animal settling itself to sleep. The song had found a way out into the air and followed him a little, then the wind took it. He drove. The miles did not argue for a time. Then the road bent around a wide pasture and he saw, or thought he saw, the diner again on the horizon, its sign a low red pulse. He frowned and told himself this highway, like many, had a taste for repetition. The land was that flat. A building you had left could look like a building you had not yet come to. He drove another mile and there it was again. Closer now, the windows looking empty and full in the way they had. He felt his hands go damp and he loosened them from the wheel and tightened them again. The wind laid its tongue along the seam of the door like a thing that wanted in. He did not slow the second time. He glanced left and saw Mabel at the counter and saw himself in the last booth with the posture he kept when he thought no one was watching. He told himself this was the heat, and the way highways loop a man's mind back on him until his own thoughts begin to look like signs. He took the right fork at a county road where a blown-down billboard had once advertised a museum of rattlesnakes and oddities. The road narrowed and the surface turned from patched asphalt to chip seal that sounded like rain under the tires. The sky made a new lid for itself and thunder mumbled far off to the south. Separate weather he would never meet. He drove another 20 minutes by the clock and 50 by the part of himself that kept time with losses. When he came around a low rise and down into a sump where the cottonwoods crowded closer than they should, the diner was there for the third time. Plain as a neighbor you had been avoiding in a small town where avoidance has the life expectancy of a moth. He stopped in the road because you can do that when no one else is coming. He listened to the wind and the engine tick. He said his brother's name out loud, and it sounded both like a prayer and like the call you make over and over by the edge of a lake when you are sure you know where the person you love is about to surface. He turned off the engine and the world took one step closer. The jukebox carried itself across the road in the same steady way, and he could hear that one line like a promise made with a hand on a door. "I'll be seeing you." He left the box of personal effects on the seat. He did not think about the key in the envelope or how a man could support the weight of a life measured in papers and a watch and a wallet with a few coupons folded around a photograph. He got out. The gravel again, the dust again, the bell on the door again. The coolness inside again, like the deep shade under a bridge on a noon so harsh it eats details. Mabel looked up as if she had expected him. The cook in the back raised a hand that might have been hello and might have been a warning. The booths looked normal. He did not look at the windows. He went to the counter and put his hands on the same square of formica, where the shine had been rubbed down by everyone before him. He breathed. The song went to the second verse, and he knew if he stayed long enough it would go to the first again, and the first would not be the beginning. He said, "If I sit, it will be for a while." And the words surprised him because they made a shape of something he had been carrying loosely. Mabel nodded like she knew about weights that could take your balance if you did not stand right. "You could sit," she said. "People do. They wait in their booth until they find the thing they were supposed to see. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes time has already been used up and they do not notice until they try to spend the rest." "I saw him," he said. "He looked good. Better than the last time." She put a glass of water on the counter. His hands shook a little, so he held the glass with both. "There are people who think this place is a trick," she said. "There are people who think it is a kindness. It is likely it does not care which. The highway made a door in the land, and things on both sides of the door learned to lean." He thought about the woman with the bandage and wanted to ask if she was all right. He wanted a ledger that would tell him what his errors cost and who had come to collect. He did not ask. The jukebox scratched in a soft way that sounded like a hand over a face. When the bell on the door jingled, he turned with a body that had not been given permission. A couple came in, young and shiny the way people get when they can afford to be, and the man had a camera hung from his neck like he was trying on a life. They smiled at the room like it was a place in a book that had been waiting for them. They took the corner booth. The woman said the song was cute, and then said it again softer when she looked in the window and reached for the man's hand. He followed her gaze. His face went strange for a second, then he laughed and told her she was seeing things because it was so bright outside. He took a picture anyway. The flash did not come because the camera had better sense than the man. The woman kept her hand in his and her eyes on the glass where someone she knew must have been sitting and making a small and private expression. Caleb understood, all at once and without negotiation, what the place was for. It was not a trap exactly. It did not need to be. It was more like the call of a particular bird that you heard only when you had reached the mile, where you finally let your shoulders drop. It was the last place you came before you understood how far you had been carrying yourself, without looking at your own shadow. It was the booth where patterns ended because you had finally sat still long enough to see them. He sat. He took the last booth by the door because it had always been his. Mabel brought him water without asking and kept her eyes kind and not curious. He waited. In the glass he saw the boy again. Gage, with his hair still damp from water that had taken him and handed him back only as a story that hurt to tell. Gage lifted one hand and touched the glass. The woman with the bandage was there too, 2 booths up, and when she looked his way he lifted his hand toward her without thinking and her shoulders eased. Other faces came and went the way the sun leans along the counter. Some stayed, some were only the shine of a memory against a surface. The couple finished half a burger between them and left money under the salt and went out into a world where the car would start and the miles would behave for a time. The jukebox began the song again after a hiss that sounded like the tide against something long sunk. The door opened at some point and an old rancher came in, hat in hand, and sat like a man who had miscounted his cattle by one and knew which one it was. The cook wiped the grill without needing to think about it. The light changed. The wind changed. Hours passed without being called that. In the glass, Caleb watched himself breathe and tried to learn what it looked like to forgive someone who had never asked him to. When full dark came, it was the kind of dark you only find where there is nothing to borrow light from. The diner became its own lantern. The windows changed character, stopped being a kind of truth and began to be a kind of door. The faces in them were clearer, their mouths moving with words that huddled against the inside of the glass and did not cross. Gage said something that made him want to laugh and cry, and then shook his head like the kid he had been whose hair had never wanted to do what his mother asked. The woman from the median said his name without sound, and the syllables still struck him, the way you can feel thunder in your ribs from a storm so far off you cannot see it. Caleb put his palm to the window and the cold surprised him. He felt pressure from the other side, and for a second it was like he and his brother were touching through ice. He understood, then, that if he kept his hand there and kept his eyes there, he might never take either away. He could pass through the kind of door that is only a change in where you are looking. He could become the person in the window, become the memory for someone else who would sit here later and wonder whether to stand or to lean closer. He had always thought about leaving as a simple thing, a clean line from here to there. But the truth of leaving was that it was mostly a matter of staying with the right intention. He took his hand down. He turned on the bench and looked at the room. It was small and human and smelled like onions and coffee and a cleaner that tried hard. Mabel was refilling a sugar dispenser with care, like she was putting something back into someone's pockets. The cook leaned against the pass and looked out through the order window at the emptiness beyond the booths. The bell on the door moved a little in a wind that could not possibly get in. Caleb found the box of personal effects had come into his hands without his planning it. He did not remember carrying it in, but there it was, the tape neat, the edges squared. He pulled the key from the envelope. He opened the box. Inside was a wallet, a library card, a pair of reading glasses with one arm repaired in careful tape, a photograph of two boys by a lake, and a woman whose face had the tired pride of someone who knows the boys will not look like that for long, a church program with a date that made him look up and count, and a folded sheet of paper in his mother's hand. He unfolded it. The words were simple. I know you tried. Nobody tells anyone how heavy trying is. I want you to remember to forgive yourself before you forget how. Bury me where I can hear the road. He read it twice. He put it back and closed the box and understood there was no magic in any of it. Only the terrible, gentle clarity that sometimes comes when you are ready to stop fighting the shape of your life. He stood, the song slid toward its end. He went to the counter and left the box there with both hands. Mabel watched him with a stillness that had nothing to do with fear. I need to go, he said. You do, she said. You can come back. People say that like it is a threat. Sometimes it is not, he nodded. He looked once more at the window and the faces there. Gage tilted his head and made the face he always made when he wanted Caleb to be braver than he felt. The woman from the median had her hands folded and it looked like a kind of peace had found a chair with her. Others faded with the obedient gradualness of a tide. In his own reflection, Caleb saw a man who looked like he might be able to keep a promise across more than 1 mile. He walked out. The night took him in and the sky over the panhandle had unbuttoned an inch to show a few stars trying to be brave. He started the truck. He set his hat on the passenger seat on top of the letter. He turned east. The road opened its mouth and sang the song that roads do. A long hum that reminds you distance is only a kind of time with a sign on it. He drove without looking in the rear view because he did not need to yet. Miles later, when the wind had changed again and a high, mean line of clouds had begun to collect along the northern edge of the world, a pair of headlights found him in his mirror. They were a long way back and unhurried. A traveler who had made other choices and was still going to make this one. He watched until they dropped into a shallow, the way lights do when the land folds into itself. He did not see the diner again that night. That did not mean it was not there. The next morning, in a town where the main street had a mural that time had peeled, and a coffee counter where the cups were heavier than they needed to be, he filled the tank and looked up a cemetery that lay along a county road, with a line of hackberry trees doing their best. He talked to a man with a tractor about hardness and depth. He did what men do when the job at hand is also the job that carries them forward. When the time came, he chose a place near the fence where the trucks on the highway would whine soft. He set his mother down into a square that fit, and said the words he could manage and did not apologize for how short they were. The wind said the rest. That night, in a motel near Shamrock where the carpet had learned every story anybody cared to tell it, he dreamed of the diner. He dreamed he was sitting in the last booth by the door, and the jukebox was playing the only song it knew, and people came and went and put their hands to the glass and took them away again. In the morning, he woke to a bright square of sun and a feeling that did not need a word. He went back to work in a week. He repaired a sign that had been listing south of McLean, climbed a ladder that creaked and held, tightened bolts that seemed grateful to be chosen. He stopped looking at his phone in the cab and set it in the glove box where it could not pretend to be urgent. On the way home, he took the long way once and did not punish himself for the extra miles. Sometimes at a red light, he thought he heard a song. It would be a trick of wind or a radio from a car behind him, or a memory looking for purchase, and he would feel the muscles in his shoulders draw in the way they had at the window. He would breathe. He would look ahead. The light would go green. Some afternoons, far out on an old road with no one coming for minutes at a time, a diner would rise ahead of him from the heat. He could not say if it was the same one, or if there were others in the country that shared the same faithful joke. He did not stop each time. He did not need to. He knew where the door was and how the bell sounded and what the song would promise. On the days he did pull in, Mabel would look up like a person glad of company, and he would take his booth and nod at the faces in the glass without counting them. Some new, some old, all insisting neither cruelty nor kindness is ever wasted. One night in late summer, when a storm pounded the panhandle so hard it felt like the land was being retyped, a young woman came in soaked to the skin with a man who was trying to be brave for both of them. They sat in the corner and the windows filled with the silver of rain. In the glass, they each saw someone they had not expected, and let their hands find each other again in a way that made Mabel smile without showing teeth. Caleb lifted his coffee and watched and felt that same heavy, gentle thing he had started carrying when the box came fastened shut. The weight that hurt in a way that made him stand straighter. He thought of his mother's note and how the last line was not a request so much as a description of who she had always been. "Bury me where I can hear the road." He had done that. The road had answered. The song had promised the rest without telling him what it would cost. He had learned that promises are not worth less for being expensive. People will tell you that a place like that is a myth or a lie or a trick of heat. People will tell you there is no way the same diner sits again and again beside a highway that was bypassed before some of us were born. People will say the song is a coincidence of needle and groove. They are not wrong in the way that matters for them. There will always be more people on the road than there are booths in the last stop, which is one of the few pieces of mercy the world has built into itself. But if one night you find yourself low on gas between towns, a part of your life rattling around in a box beside you, and you see stainless steel dulled by wind and a red sign breathing over a gravel lot, you might stop. You might sit. You might look too long into the window and count the faces that know yours. If you do, remember this: the door swings both ways. So does the song. And whether you leave as a person stepping into heat, or as a reflection that waits with patience for the next traveler, the highway will keep making its long, faithful sound, and someone you loved will hear it as they fall asleep, and that will be enough for a while.